Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the summer of 2023, during what was supposed to be a therapeutic hiking trip in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. I'd been struggling with anxiety since my divorce 6 months prior. The constant pressure in my chest, the racing thoughts that kept me up at night. My therapist suggested immersing myself in nature might help reset my nervous system. Spend some time alone with your thoughts in the wilderness, she'd said. Face your fears in a controlled environment. If only she knew what fears awaited me in Albright Grove. I'd planned a 4-day solo trek along the remote northeastern section of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The area was known for its old-growth forest, with massive tulip poplars and hemlock trees that had stood for centuries. I chose a lesser-traveled route that would take me past Albright Grove and eventually to Mount Camerer, where I'd loop back to my starting point at Cosby Campground. The morning I set out, the park ranger at the station gave me a curious look when I showed him my planned route. "Albright Hollow," he said, his finger hovering over the map. "People don't camp there much anymore." "Too remote?" I asked, thinking that was exactly what I wanted. He hesitated. "Just stay on the marked trails. There's been some odd reports from that area. Probably nothing, but hikers get confused in that section. Claim the trails shift." I laughed it off. "GPS doesn't lie," I said, tapping my phone. His expression didn't change. "Reception's spotty up there, and the old-timers say there's something about Albright Hollow that messes with electronics." I thanked him for the warning, but didn't give it much thought. Every rural area had its local legends, and I'd equipped myself with both digital navigation and traditional maps as backup. My first day on the trail was exactly what I needed. The forest welcomed me with a cathedral of green, sunlight filtering through the dense canopy and painting dappled patterns on the ground. The air was thick with the scent of moss and wet earth. Birds called to each other overhead, and twice I spotted white-tailed deer watching me from a distance before bounding away. I hiked for about 6 hours, stopping occasionally to drink water and eat trail mix, feeling the tension in my shoulders gradually release with each mile. The physical exertion was grounding in a way my therapist's breathing exercises never managed to be. For the first time in months, my mind wasn't constantly spinning with regrets about my failed marriage. By late afternoon, I reached my first campsite near a small stream. I set up my tent, purified some water, and ate a simple dinner of dehydrated beef stew as the forest darkened around me. The night sounds began. Owls hooting, insects chirping, the rustle of nocturnal creatures moving through underbrush. Natural, white noise that lulled me into the deepest sleep I'd had in months. The second day brought me closer to Albright Grove. The trail became steeper, the forest older. The trees here were enormous, their massive trunks wider than my arm span. Moss-covered logs created natural bridges over small ravines, and fungi of various colors sprouted from decaying wood. The beauty was primeval, untouched. Around noon, I noticed the birdsong had stopped. The forest fell into an unnatural silence that made the hair on my neck stand up. I told myself it was probably just the time of day, or perhaps a predator in the area causing the birds to quiet down. But part of me recognized this silence as the kind that precedes something significant, like the sudden quiet before a thunderstorm. The trail began to narrow, becoming overgrown in places. Twice I had to check my map to confirm I was still on the right path. The GPS on my phone showed me exactly where I was, but something felt off about the surroundings. According to my map, I should have crossed another stream by now. It was then that I first felt like I was being watched. I stopped and slowly turned in a complete circle, scanning the forest. Nothing moved except the leaves stirring in the slight breeze. Still, the feeling persisted, a prickling awareness of eyes tracking my movements. "Hello," I called out, immediately feeling foolish. The sound of my voice seemed swallowed by the trees, not echoing as it should in an open space. I quickened my pace, wanting to reach my planned camping area before dusk. The trail began to descend into a hollow surrounded by towering trees that blocked much of the sunlight. The temperature dropped noticeably as I moved deeper into the depression in the land. According to my map, this was the outer edge of Albright Grove. It should have been beautiful, but something about it felt wrong. The trees here seemed twisted in unnatural ways, their branches reaching toward each other like desperate fingers. The ground was unusually soft, my boots sinking slightly with each step. I checked my phone to confirm my location and found the battery had drained from 80% to 15% in less than an hour. The GPS was still working, but the blue dot marking my position seemed to jump erratically, sometimes showing me off the trail entirely when I knew I wasn't. The ranger's warning about electronics acting strangely came back to me. I pulled out my compass and paper map as backup, but the compass needle spun lazily, never settling on north. A cold sweat broke out across my back. I decided to make camp earlier than planned, not wanting to risk getting lost as daylight faded. I found a small clearing that seemed relatively flat and began setting up my tent. The ground felt strange, too yielding beneath my stakes, almost spongy. When I pushed a stake in, the earth seemed to give a subtle resistance, then accept it with a sigh. As I worked, the silence of the forest pressed in on me. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of leaves rustling. It was as if the hollow was holding its breath, watching me. I tried to shake off my growing unease, attributing it to being alone and the natural eeriness that can come with deep wilderness. I got a small fire going, but the flames burned with an unusual dimness, casting barely enough light to see my immediate surroundings. The wood hissed and popped more than it should, sending up occasional sparks of strange colors, blues and greens that momentarily illuminated the darkness before dying away. After a meager dinner, I crawled into my tent earlier than usual, zipping the flap securely and turning on my headlamp to read a bit before sleep. The battery in the lamp, which I'd replaced just before the trip, was already weak, the light flickering intermittently. I tried to read but couldn't focus on the words. The silence outside was too complete, too heavy. I turned off the lamp to conserve the battery and lay in darkness, listening. That's when I first heard it, a sound so faint I initially thought I'd imagined it. A wet, sliding noise like something large and damp being dragged across the forest floor. It moved past my tent, circling around to the other side, then stopping. I held my breath, straining to hear. For several minutes, nothing. Then a soft, chittering sound, almost like insects but with an unsettling pattern that seemed almost like language. It rose and fell in pitch, coming from all around my tent rather than from a single source. Just wildlife, I whispered to myself, though I knew no animal native to these mountains made sounds like that. The chittering stopped abruptly. In the silence that followed, I heard what sounded like breathing. Heavy, wet breathing punctuated by occasional clicks. It was close, just outside the thin fabric of my tent. I reached for my hunting knife, clutching it tightly as I lay perfectly still. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain whatever was outside could hear it. I waited for something to happen, for claws to tear through my tent, for some creature to reveal itself. Instead, after what seemed like hours, the breathing moved away, the wet, dragging sound receding into the forest. I remained frozen, knife in hand, until exhaustion finally pulled me into a fitful sleep filled with dreams of being hunted through endless trees by something I couldn't see. I woke with a start just before dawn, momentarily disoriented. The air in my tent was stifling, unusually warm and damp. When I moved, my sleeping bag made a strange sucking sound against the tent floor, as if it had been partially absorbed into the material. Unzipping the tent, I was hit by a wall of thick fog. Visibility was limited to about 10 feet in any direction, the massive trees around my campsite appearing as looming shadows in the mist. Everything was wet, not with morning dew, but with a slick, slightly viscous moisture that coated every surface. My fire pit from the night before was a black smear of ash. The stones I'd used to ring it pushed aside as if something had crawled through it. More disturbing were the depressions in the soft ground around my tent, wide, shapeless impressions that looked as if a large body had settled there, watching me as I slept. I packed quickly, fighting rising panic. I needed to get out of this hollow, to find my way back to the main trail and head toward Mount Camerer as planned. But when I tried to use my phone to check my location, I found it completely dead despite having charged it on a portable battery just yesterday. My paper map and compass would have to do, though the compass still spun erratically. I oriented myself as best I could based on the terrain and what I remembered from yesterday's hike, and set off in what I hoped was the direction of the main trail. The fog clung to me as I walked, beating on my skin and clothes. It had an unpleasant odor, earthy but with an undertone of decay, like rotting vegetation. The ground continued to feel wrong beneath my feet, too soft and yielding, occasionally seeming to shift subtly as if adjusting to my weight. After about an hour of hiking, I realized with growing horror that I recognized my surroundings. Somehow, I'd walked in a circle, returning to my campsite from the opposite direction. The flattened spot where my tent had been was unmistakable, though it now looked different. The depression deeper, the edges more defined, as if something had been digging. "This isn't possible," I said aloud, my voice sounding muffled in the fog. As if in response, a chittering noise rose from somewhere to my left. It was the same sound I'd heard in the night, but louder now, more confident. It was answered by another chittering from my right, then another from behind me. I broke into a run, charging blindly through the fog in the only direction that hadn't produced a sound. Branches whipped at my face, roots seemed to reach up to trip me, and the ground became increasingly soft and unstable. I splashed through what felt like shallow pools of warm, thick liquid that clung to my boots. I don't know how long I ran before I had to stop, lungs burning, legs shaking. The fog had thinned slightly, allowing me to see perhaps 20 feet ahead. I found myself in another clearing, this one dominated by a massive tulip poplar that must have been hundreds of years old. Its trunk was enormous, but there was something wrong with its bark. It seemed to pulse slightly, the deep furrows widening and contracting in a rhythm like slow breathing. At the base of the tree was a dark opening, a hollow large enough for a man to crawl into. The edges of the hollow glistened wetly in what little light penetrated the fog, and I could swear I saw movement within, something shifting in the darkness. A sound from behind made me turn. Through the thinning fog, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. Relief flooded through me at the sight of another human being. "Hello," I called out, taking a step toward them. "I'm lost. Can you help me find the main trail?" The figure didn't respond. As I moved closer, details began to emerge from the fog. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing what looked like old-fashioned hiking gear, the kind you might see in photographs from the 1950s. He stood perfectly still, his face turned away from me. "Excuse me," I said, approaching cautiously. "Do you know the way out of this hollow?" The man slowly turned toward me. The movement was wrong, too fluid, as if his joints weren't quite in the right places. When I saw his face, I stumbled backward with a choked cry. His features were blurred, as if someone had taken an eraser to them, leaving only vague indentations where eyes, nose, and mouth should be. But worst of all, his chest had a gaping hole where something had burst outward, the edges of the wound not bloody but lined with what looked like the same bark as the massive tree behind me. I tripped and fell, scrambling backward on the forest floor as the figure took a step toward me. Its movements were jerky now, like a puppet controlled by inexperienced hands. It opened what should have been its mouth, and a sound emerged. The same chittering I'd heard in the night, but formed into something approaching words. "Stay. With us." More figures emerged from the fog around the clearing. 3, then 5, then more than I could count at a glance. All had the same blurred features, the same unnatural movements. Some had wounds like the first, while others were missing limbs or had strange growths protruding from their bodies. I recognized what they were wearing: hiking gear from different eras, a woman in modern North Face clothing, an elderly man in what looked like 1970s camping attire, a young couple in matching outfits that might have been current 5 or 6 years ago. All transformed, all wrong. They began to move toward me with the same jerky gait, chittering and clicking, reaching out with hands that weren't quite hands anymore, some elongated into root-like appendages, others fused into paddle-shaped extremities. I scrambled to my feet and ran toward the only gap I could see between them. One reached for me, its arms stretching impossibly long, fingers brushing my pack before I tore away. The touch left a burning sensation, like acid eating through the fabric to the skin beneath. I ran blindly through the forest, the ground becoming increasingly treacherous. What had been merely soft before was now actively shifting beneath my feet, pockets of it giving way to reveal deeper pools of the same viscous fluid I'd encountered earlier. The trees themselves seemed to move, bending toward me as I passed, branches reaching down like grasping hands. Behind me, I could hear them pursuing, the wet, sliding sound of their movement, the chittering calls they used to coordinate. They knew these woods, knew how to navigate the treacherous ground. I was at a severe disadvantage. I splashed through another pool of the fluid and noticed with horror that my boots were beginning to dissolve where it touched them. The material bubbled and melted, and I could feel a burning sensation starting to reach my skin. I kicked them off without stopping, continuing barefoot over ground that felt increasingly like running across a waterbed. The fog had cleared enough that I could see I was heading uphill, which gave me hope. The hollow was behind me, and if I could reach higher ground, perhaps I could orient myself and find a way out of this nightmare. As I climbed, the ground gradually became firmer, more normal. The strange fluid pools became less frequent, then disappeared entirely. The trees began to look right again, still ancient and massive, but no longer seeming to move or breathe. After what seemed like hours of desperate flight, I collapsed against a boulder, lungs heaving, feet bloody and raw. The forest around me was quiet, but it was the natural quiet of wilderness, not the oppressive silence of the hollow. I could hear birds again, distant but present. The air smelled clean. I sat there for a long time, afraid to move, afraid they were still pursuing me. When nothing appeared, I finally gathered enough courage to assess my situation. I had lost my boots, my phone was dead, and my pack had been partially melted by whatever had touched it. But I still had my water, some food, and my knife. I needed to find my way back to civilization, but I had no idea which direction to go. The sun was now visible through the canopy, and I used it to establish east, reasoning that if I headed east long enough I would eventually reach the edge of the national park and hopefully a road. I tore strips from my shirt to wrap my feet and began walking. Each step was painful, but the farther I moved from the hollow, the safer I felt. The forest returned to its natural state, beautiful, serene, alive in a normal way. As the day wore on, I began to hear a sound that made my heart leap: rushing water. A river would lead downhill, and downhill would eventually lead to roads and towns. I quickened my pace despite my injured feet, following the growing sound until I broke through the trees to find a wide, swiftly flowing river. I didn't recognize it from my map, but it had to flow somewhere. I decided to follow it downstream. After another hour of painful walking, I spotted something that made me sink to my knees in relief: a wooden bridge, man-made and solid, spanning the river, and beyond it, what looked like a maintained trail. I crossed the bridge and found myself on what was clearly a popular hiking path. Within 20 minutes, I encountered a group of day hikers who looked at me with alarm: a wild-eyed man with torn clothes, wrapped feet, and a partially melted backpack. They helped me reach a ranger station, where I told a sanitized version of my experience, claiming I'd gotten lost and had to abandon my boots after stepping in a bog. The rangers nodded sympathetically, familiar with hikers who overestimated their abilities. One of them, an older man with weathered skin and knowing eyes, pulled me aside as the others arranged for my transport back to my car. "You were in Albright Hollow, weren't you?" he asked quietly. When I nodded, he sighed. "You're not the first. Not everyone makes it out." "What? What is that place?" I managed to ask. He shook his head. "Old Cherokee legends say it's a thin spot, a place where something broke through long ago. They avoided it for centuries before white settlers came. We try to keep people away, but the trails shift sometimes, leading hikers there even when they think they're somewhere else. Those people I saw..." "Don't," he said sharply. "Don't talk about it. Talking about it makes it stronger, gives it reach. You got out. That's what matters." I wanted to demand more answers, but something in his expression stopped me. He knew more than he was saying, but he also knew the danger of saying it. I returned home physically intact but mentally shattered. For weeks afterward, I found a strange moss growing on my feet where they had been exposed to the fluid in the hollow. Doctors were baffled, eventually removing it surgically, but it came back twice before finally disappearing. I've never gone hiking again. Even local parks with well-maintained paths feel threatening now. At night, I sometimes wake to the sound of chittering outside my bedroom window, though when I look, there's never anything there. And on rainy days when fog rolls in, I swear I can smell that distinctive odor of decay, that essence of the hollow reaching for me. Sometimes I check news reports about Great Smoky Mountains National Park, looking for stories of missing hikers. There are always a few each year. I wonder how many of them wandered into Albright Hollow. I wonder how many became part of whatever dwells there, their features slowly erasing, their bodies transforming to join the hunting parties that search for new victims. I wonder how close I came to becoming one of them, and whether some part of me, some microscopic spore or seed, is still there, growing, waiting for my return. My therapist says I experienced a trauma-induced hallucination brought on by isolation and anxiety. She doesn't believe in thin spots or ancient entities that digest humans over centuries. She encourages me to face my fears, to go back to the mountains and create new, positive associations. I smile and nod during our sessions, but I know better. The hollow is real. It hungers. And somewhere in the Great Smoky Mountains, it waits patiently for its next meal to wander willingly into its mouth. My name is Jessica Davis, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the summer of 2024, deep in the heart of the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee. What began as a much-needed escape from my hectic life as a high school counselor turned into something I still struggle to explain. Or forget. I'd always been the adventurous type, the friend who suggested hiking trips and outdoor excursions. My fellow counselors at East Nashville High often joked that I'd been born in the wrong century, that I belonged in some frontier wilderness with nothing but my wits and a compass. Maybe they were right. Maybe that's why I felt so drawn to the remote parts of Tennessee that most tourists never see. After a particularly difficult school year, one where I'd lost a student to suicide despite my best efforts to help him, I needed solitude, space to breathe, time to process my grief and guilt away from the sympathetic glances of colleagues who meant well but couldn't possibly understand. So when summer break arrived, I packed my gear and headed for the mountains alone, despite my friend's concerns about a woman hiking solo. I chose a lesser-known trail system near Coker Creek in an area locally known as Whispering Hollow. The name should have been my first warning, but I dismissed it as quaint local folklore. The ranger at the station raised an eyebrow when I mentioned my destination. "Whispering Hollow? That's pretty isolated territory, ma'am," he said, studying my permit application. "Not many folks go out that way anymore." "That's exactly why I picked it," I replied with a smile. "I need some peace and quiet." His weathered face remained serious. "There's quiet, and then there's that place. Just be careful, stay on the marked trails, and maybe consider Echo Ridge instead. Got some beautiful views and more hikers around." I appreciate the concern, but I've done my research. I'll be fine." He hesitated, then stamped my permit. "At least take this map. The official ones don't mark some of the peculiarities of that area." I accepted the hand-drawn additions to my topographical map, thanking him while privately thinking he was being overly cautious. Only later would I understand he was trying to save my life. The first 2 days were everything I'd hoped for. The forest was lush and vibrant with summer growth, the trails challenging enough to exhaust my body and quiet my mind. I set up camp near a pristine stream each night, falling asleep to the gentle chorus of water over rocks and distant owl calls. My phone had lost service almost immediately after entering the forest, which suited me fine. I'd left a detailed itinerary with my sister Amanda, with instructions to alert authorities if I didn't check in by Sunday evening. On the 3rd day, I ventured deeper into the hollow, following a trail that narrowed significantly as it wound between ancient trees. The forest seemed to change character here. The trees grew closer together, blocking more sunlight, and the undergrowth thinned to almost nothing, as if reluctant to take root. The birdsong that had accompanied me for days gradually fell silent. I paused to check my map, noting that I was approaching something the ranger had marked as Stillwater Sinkhole, a void. My curiosity piqued. I decided to at least glimpse this geological feature before continuing to my planned campsite. The trail dipped suddenly, and as I rounded a sharp bend, the forest opened into a perfectly circular clearing about 50 yards across. In the center lay a small pond of unnaturally still water, so dark it appeared black despite the afternoon sunlight. No plants grew along its edges, creating a barren ring of dirt around the water. The silence was absolute. No insects buzzing, no leaves rustling despite the light breeze I could feel on my skin. Something about the place made my skin crawl. A primal instinct urged me to turn back immediately, but I forced myself to take a few photographs, trying to capture the eerie stillness. As I raised my camera for a 3rd shot, a soft whisper seemed to rise from the pond. Not words exactly, but a sound almost like my name, if names could be formed from the absence of sound rather than its presence. I backed away, telling myself it was just the wind playing tricks, but there was no wind now. Not even the slightest breeze. That night, I made camp about 2 miles from the sinkhole, in a small clearing beside a different stream. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me. Every snapping twig or rustling leaf jerked me back to alertness. Around midnight, I finally drifted off, only to wake suddenly an hour later, heart pounding. Someone, or something, was walking around my tent. The footsteps were deliberate, unhurried, circling my small shelter with measured paces. They sounded human, yet somehow wrong. Too heavy, perhaps, or with an odd cadence that human steps shouldn't have. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, barely breathing, as they completed a full circuit around my tent. Then they stopped directly in front of the entrance. I clutched my hunting knife, the only weapon I'd brought, and waited for the tent flap to move. Instead, a voice spoke. A woman's voice, but distorted as if coming through water. "Jessica," it said, my name elongated into something barely recognizable. "Why did you come to my water?" A whimper escaped my throat before I could suppress it. The voice didn't sound like it came from a person standing outside my tent. It seemed to originate from directly beside my ear. "I didn't mean to disturb anything," I whispered, though I wasn't sure why I was responding. "I'll leave tomorrow. I'm sorry." A soft laugh like stones tumbling underwater. "But you took something that wasn't yours to take." "I didn't take anything." My voice trembled. "Just pictures." "Pictures take memories. Memories belong to the hollow." The temperature inside my tent plummeted. My breath fogged in front of my face and frost began to form on the inside of the rainfly. The voice came again, but now from multiple directions at once. "Return what you've taken. Come back to the water." Then silence fell, complete and sudden. The footsteps didn't retreat. They simply ceased. I sat awake until dawn, knife in hand, shivering from both cold and fear. When first light finally came, I forced myself out of the tent, half expecting to find footprints circling my campsite. The ground was undisturbed. No tracks, no signs that anything had approached during the night, but a thin layer of frost covered the forest floor in a perfect circle around my tent, despite the summer temperatures. I should have packed up and hiked out immediately. Any rational person would have, but something kept me there. A need to understand, perhaps, or something more insidious. I convinced myself that stress and isolation had triggered some sort of waking nightmare. I had no evidence that anything supernatural had occurred. The frost could be explained by some strange microclimate phenomenon. The voice was likely just my own fears talking to me in the dark. So, instead of leaving, I decided to hike to Bald River Falls, several miles away from the sinkhole, in the opposite direction. The moving water and tourist-frequented spot would be a welcome change from the oppressive silence of the hollow. The hike took longer than expected. Several times I found myself disoriented, the trails seeming to shift direction despite what my map showed. Twice I ended up back at the same lightning-struck oak, though I'd been certain I was walking a straight path away from it. By mid-afternoon, when I finally heard the distant rush of the falls, relief flooded through me. The falls were as beautiful as promised, 60 feet of white water cascading over moss-covered rocks into a clear pool below. A few day hikers milled about, taking photos and eating packed lunches. The normalcy was comforting. I found a sunny rock and unpacked my own lunch, feeling my tensions ease as I chatted with an elderly couple who were celebrating their 40th anniversary with a tour of Tennessee's waterfalls. As the couple moved on, I decided to check my camera, scrolling through the photos I'd taken the previous day. The forest shots were beautiful, sunlight filtering through leaves, interesting fungi, a startled deer. But when I reached the sinkhole photos, my blood turned cold. Where there should have been images of the unnaturally still pond, there were instead photos of myself. Not selfies. These were taken from several yards away, showing me standing at the edge of the sinkhole, looking down into the water. In each successive image, I was closer to the water, leaning farther over. In the final photo, a pale, waterlogged hand reached up from the black surface toward my own outstretched fingers. I dropped the camera, a strangled cry escaping my lips. A nearby hiker glanced over with concern. "You okay there, miss?" I couldn't form words. I just pointed at my camera, now lying face up on the rock. He picked it up curiously and looked at the screen. "Nice waterfall shot," he commented, turning the camera to show me. "You've got a good eye." The screen displayed a perfectly normal picture of Bald River Falls. Not me. Not the sinkhole. Not the reaching hand. I took the camera back with trembling fingers and quickly switched it off, mumbling thanks. The sun was beginning its descent, and the day hikers were packing up to leave. I should have gone with them, asked for a ride back to civilization. Instead, I set up camp in a designated area about a quarter-mile from the falls. There were 2 other tents nearby, a father and son on a fishing trip, and a solo hiker named Marcus who seemed friendly without being intrusive. That night I slept soundly for the first time since entering the forest. The constant sound of the falls drowned out the smaller night noises that had kept me on edge, and the presence of other campers provided a sense of security. I woke refreshed, almost believing I could dismiss the previous night's experience as nothing more than an exhaustion-induced hallucination. Over breakfast, Marcus mentioned he was heading back toward the ranger station that day. He offered to wait if I wanted to hike out with him, an option that seemed increasingly appealing. I was packing up when my camera, tucked securely in my backpack, began to emit a sound. Not the usual digital beep, but a wet, gurgling noise that raised the hair on my arms. I unzipped the pack and found the camera dripping with water, though nothing else in the bag was wet. When I picked it up, black liquid oozed from the battery compartment and card slot. It smelled of rot and stagnant water. Marcus watched with wide eyes as I dropped the device back into my pack. "That's not normal," he said unnecessarily. "Just a malfunction," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I should probably head back too. Let me finish packing and I'll join you." "Sure thing, I'll wait by the trailhead." He seemed eager to put some distance between himself and whatever was happening with my camera. As soon as he was out of sight, I pulled the memory card from the sodden camera. Despite being submerged in the black liquid, it appeared undamaged. Something compelled me to keep it, to verify what I'd seen. I slipped it into my pocket and buried the ruined camera under some leaves, suddenly afraid to have it in my possession. I never made it to the trailhead where Marcus waited. Somehow, every path I took led me deeper into the forest, away from the falls, away from safety. The trails twisted in impossible ways. The sun jumped positions in the sky as if hours were passing in minutes. By late afternoon, I found myself standing once again at the edge of the Stillwater sinkhole, with no memory of how I'd arrived there. The black water was no longer still. It rippled continuously from the center outward, as if something beneath the surface was stirring. As I watched, frozen in place, the ripples changed direction, now moving from the edges toward the center, creating a subtle but unmistakable vortex. "You came back." The voice from the night before seemed to emanate from the water itself. "You brought what you took." My hand moved involuntarily toward my pocket, where the memory card pressed against my thigh through the fabric. "Why are you doing this?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The water rippled more vigorously. "I'm not doing anything, Jessica." "You are. You always do." A figure began to rise from the center of the pond. A woman, her back to me, long dark hair plastered against pale skin. Water cascaded from her form as she slowly straightened. "Who are you?" I asked, though some deep part of me already knew the answer. The figure turned and I stared into my own face. But wrong. All wrong. The eyes were black pools, the skin gray and bloated. The lips moved unnaturally as it spoke with my voice. "I'm what happens every time. What always happens. What will happen again." I stumbled backward, tripping over an exposed root and falling hard. The thing that wore my face began to move toward the shore, water sluicing from its body with each lurching step. "I don't understand," I gasped, scrambling backward on hands and feet like a crab. The hollow remembers even when you forget. My doppelganger's head tilted at an impossible angle. "How many times have you come here, Jessica? How many times have you been drawn back to these woods, to this water?" Memories not my own flooded my mind. Other summers, other hikes, always ending at this same pond, always ending with me walking into the black water pulled by something I couldn't resist. My body discovered days or weeks later, or sometimes not at all, a continuous cycle of death and return, playing out over and over across decades. "No," I whispered. "This is the first time I've been here. I would remember." The hollow keeps the memories. The thing smiled, a terrible stretching of gray flesh. "I keep them for you until you're ready to remember again." It was close now, water still dripping from its outstretched fingers. I forced myself to my feet and ran, crashing through undergrowth, abandoning the trail entirely. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me with every step, but terror kept me moving forward. Night fell with supernatural swiftness, plunging the forest into deep darkness. Still I ran, guided now only by instinct and the desperate need to put distance between myself and the thing from the pond. My lungs burned, muscles screamed in protest, but stopping wasn't an option. Eventually, physical limits forced me to slow. I found myself in an unfamiliar part of the forest, the trees more widely spaced, the underbrush thicker. No trail was visible. I had no idea which direction would lead to safety, but the bone-deep certainty that I was being pursued kept me moving. I stumbled upon a small, dilapidated cabin just before midnight. In my desperate state, the abandoned structure seemed like a fortress. The door hung askew on rusted hinges, and the single window was boarded over, but the roof appeared mostly intact. I ducked inside, hoping to hide until daylight. The interior smelled of mold and decay. Broken furniture littered the dirt floor, and something small scurried away into the shadows as I entered. Using my flashlight, I cleared a space in the corner farthest from the door and huddled there, back pressed against the rough log wall. Hours passed. Every sound from the forest outside sent fresh waves of adrenaline through my exhausted body. Sometime around what must have been 3 a.m., I heard the footsteps again, that same measured, unhurried pace now approaching the cabin. They stopped at the threshold. Silence stretched for what seemed an eternity. Then, a soft scraping sound as something moved across the doorway. Jessica. My name in my own voice, but wrong. You can't hide from yourself. I pressed a fist against my mouth to keep from screaming. My flashlight dimmed, then went out, plunging me into absolute darkness. Every summer, when the grief becomes too much to bear. The voice came from inside the cabin now, though I'd seen nothing enter. Every summer, when you convince yourself that solitude will heal you. Every summer, when you believe this time will be different. Leave me alone, I whimpered into the darkness. Please, just leave me alone. A figure materialized in the darkness. Not solid, but an absence of darkness like a photographic negative given form. It knelt before me, its featureless face inches from mine. You came to forget. But the water remembers. The hollow remembers. I remember. It reached for me, hands passing through my raised arms as if they were smoke. Cold spread through my chest as its fingers sank into me, reaching for something deep inside. The boy wasn't your fault, Jessica. The voice was gentler now, almost kind. Jason's death wasn't your failure. Hearing my student's name from this thing's lips broke something inside me. Rage replaced fear. I lashed out, my hands passing through its form but somehow disrupting it, causing it to waver and retreat. Don't you dare say his name, I hissed, rising to my feet. You don't get to use him against me. The figure solidified slightly, becoming more visible as a negative space in the darkness. It seemed surprised by my resistance. You fight this time. That's new. I'm not going to your pond. I'm not walking into that water. It made a sound like laughter, but hollow and echoing. You already have, Jessica. Many times, and you will again. The hollow always calls its own back home. With sudden clarity, I remembered the memory card still in my pocket. I pulled it out, holding it up like a talisman. Is this what you want? Take it and leave me alone. The figure reached for the card, its negative space fingers closing around it. As it did, its form began to change, solidity replacing the void, colors and features taking shape until my own face stared back at me. But this time, not the grotesque, waterlogged version. This was me as I might have been, eyes clear and posture straight, unburdened by guilt and grief. You could stay, it said, its voice now indistinguishable from my own. Join the others in the water. Let the hollow take your pain away. For a moment, the offer was tempting. To end the struggle, to stop fighting the pull of the sinkhole that had apparently drawn me back time after time. But something about seeing this idealized version of myself triggered a different response. No, I said firmly, I don't belong to the hollow. My pain is mine to bear and overcome. The doppelganger's expression hardened. You'll be back. The hollow keeps what belongs to it. Not this time, I insisted, though uncertainty gnawed at me. Had I said these very words before in previous summers I couldn't remember. My double flickered like a faulty light, its edges blurring. Dawn comes, it said, voice fading. Remember or forget, the result will be the same. It dissolved into mist that seeped through the cracks in the cabin walls, leaving me alone in the darkness. I remained standing, afraid to move, until the first gray light of dawn filtered through the broken roof. Morning revealed the cabin to be even more decrepit than I'd realized. The roof, that had seemed mostly intact in the dark, now showed gaping holes, and what I'd taken for furniture was mostly collapsed sections of the walls and ceiling. Strangest of all was a small wooden table that remained standing in the center of the room, its surface covered with a fine layer of dirt except for one clear spot. A perfect handprint, smaller than my own, pressed into the dust. On the verge of collapse from exhaustion and fear, I nevertheless forced myself back into the forest. My pack and most of my supplies were lost, abandoned during my frantic flight the day before. I had only what remained in my pockets, a protein bar, my Swiss Army knife, and my nearly dead phone. I walked for hours, following the rising sun in hopes of heading east toward civilization. The forest seemed different in daylight, less threatening, more navigable. By mid-morning, I stumbled upon a marked trail, and by early afternoon, I found myself at a ranger outpost. The ranger on duty, a young woman named Eliza Murray, took one look at my scratched face and wild eyes and ushered me inside. She gave me water and asked calm professional questions about what had happened. I told her a sanitized version, that I'd gotten lost, panicked, and spent a night in an abandoned cabin before finding my way back. She nodded sympathetically. Whispering Hollow can be disorienting, even for experienced hikers. Something about the topography messes with your sense of direction. "The Stillwater sinkhole," I said, watching her reaction carefully. "What can you tell me about it?" Her professional demeanor slipped slightly. "You went there. It's marked as restricted on all official maps." "I found it by accident," I lied. It felt wrong. Eliza glanced toward the door, as if checking we were alone. "Local legend says it's a thin place, a spot where the boundary between our world and something else doesn't hold up so well. The Cherokee had stories about it. So did the settlers who came later." "What kind of stories?" She hesitated. "Stories about people being drawn back there, summer after summer, about drownings that couldn't be explained. They say the Hollow keeps a part of everyone who visits, especially those carrying grief or guilt. It uses that connection to pull them back." My blood ran cold. "And the ranger who was here a few days ago? Older man, gave me a special map?" Eliza's brow furrowed. "We haven't had anyone matching that description working here for years. Only me and Ranger Collins, who's out on patrol." She must have seen the color drain from my face because she quickly added, "But hikers pass through all the time. Probably just someone being helpful." I wasn't convinced, but I was too exhausted to pursue it further. Eliza arranged for a park vehicle to transport me back to my car at the main ranger station. Before I left, she handed me a small leather pouch on a cord. "Local tradition," she explained with a slightly embarrassed smile. "Salt, iron filings, and a bit of rowan wood. Supposed to break the Hollow's hold. Most of us who work here carry one, just in case. Probably just superstition, but..." I took it gratefully and hung it around my neck. "Thank you." The drive back to Nashville was a blur. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see my doppelganger in the back seat. When I finally reached my apartment, I went straight to my laptop and inserted the memory card from the sinkhole. It was empty. Not corrupted or damaged, simply empty, as if nothing had ever been recorded on it. I tried to return to normal life as summer wound down and the new school year approached. I told myself that stress, grief, and isolation had caused me to hallucinate or dream much of what I'd experienced. I threw away maps of Cherokee National Forest and deleted hiking websites from my bookmarks. But sometimes, I wake in the night to the sound of water dripping, though my apartment is dry. Sometimes I catch glimpses of my reflection with eyes that seem too dark, a smile that lingers too long. And when I dream of black water and a voice that calls me back to the Hollow. I won't return. I can't return. I've moved to Arizona, a desert state, far from Tennessee's forests and sinkholes. I avoid bodies of water larger than my bathtub. I've changed my name and appearance. But still, I feel the pull. Still, I find myself researching summer hiking trails despite my conscious intentions. Still, I wake with mud on my feet that I can't explain. The hollow remembers, even when I try to forget. And I fear that one summer I'll find myself once again standing at the edge of that black water, unable to resist its call. One summer, there will be no escape, no cabin, no dawn rescue. One summer, the water will finally keep me. If you're reading this, and you're drawn to the solitude of remote forests, stay away from Whispering Hollow. Stay away from the Stillwater sinkhole. Some places in this world aren't meant for us, and some memories are best left undisturbed. The hollow always calls its own back home, and I'm terrified that, despite everything, I'll answer. My name is Jessica Davis, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the summer of 2024, deep in the heart of the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee. What began as a much-needed escape from my hectic life as a high school counselor turned into something I still struggle to explain, or forget. I'd always been the adventurous type, the friend who suggested hiking trips and outdoor excursions. My fellow counselors at East Nashville High often joked that I'd been born in the wrong century, that I belonged in some frontier wilderness with nothing but my wits and a compass. Maybe they were right. Maybe that's why I felt so drawn to the remote parts of Tennessee that most tourists never see. After a particularly difficult school year, one where I'd lost a student to suicide despite my best efforts to help him, I needed solitude, space to breathe, time to process my grief and guilt away from the sympathetic glances of colleagues who meant well but couldn't possibly understand. So when summer break arrived, I packed my gear and headed for the mountains alone, despite my friends' concerns about a woman hiking solo. I chose a lesser-known trail system near Coker Creek in an area locally known as Whispering Hollow. The name should have been my first warning, but I dismissed it as quaint local folklore. The ranger at the station raised an eyebrow when I mentioned my destination. "Whispering Hollow? That's pretty isolated territory, ma'am," he said, studying my permit application. "Not many folks go out that way anymore." "That's exactly why I picked it," I replied with a smile. "I need some peace and quiet." His weathered face remained serious. "There's quiet, and then there's that place. Just be careful, stay on the marked trails, and maybe consider Echo Ridge instead. Got some beautiful views and more hikers around." "I appreciate the concern, but I've done my research. I'll be fine." He hesitated, then stamped my permit. "At least take this map. The official ones don't mark some of the peculiarities of that area." I accepted the hand-drawn additions to my topographical map, thanking him while privately thinking he was being overly cautious. Only later would I understand he was trying to save my life. The first 2 days were everything I'd hoped for. The forest was lush and vibrant with summer growth, the trails challenging enough to exhaust my body and quiet my mind. I set up camp near a pristine stream each night, falling asleep to the gentle chorus of water over rocks and distant owl calls. My phone had lost service almost immediately after entering the forest, which suited me fine. I'd left a detailed itinerary with my sister Amanda, with instructions to alert authorities if I didn't check in by Sunday evening. On the third day, I ventured deeper into the hollow, following a trail that narrowed significantly as it wound between ancient trees. The forest seemed to change character here. The trees grew closer together, blocking more sunlight, and the undergrowth thinned to almost nothing, as if reluctant to take root. The birdsong that had accompanied me for days gradually fell silent. I paused to check my map, noting that I was approaching something the ranger had marked as Stillwater Sinkhole, a void. My curiosity piqued. I decided to at least glimpse this geological feature before continuing to my planned campsite. The trail dipped suddenly, and as I rounded a sharp bend, the forest opened into a perfectly circular clearing about 50 yards across. In the center lay a small pond of unnaturally still water, so dark it appeared black despite the afternoon sunlight. No plants grew along its edges, creating a barren ring of dirt around the water. The silence was absolute. No insects buzzing, no leaves rustling despite the light breeze I could feel on my skin. Something about the place made my skin crawl. A primal instinct urged me to turn back immediately, but I forced myself to take a few photographs, trying to capture the eerie stillness. As I raised my camera for a third shot, a soft whisper seemed to rise from the pond. Not words exactly, but a sound, almost like my name, if names could be formed from the absence of sound rather than its presence. I backed away, telling myself it was just the wind playing tricks, but there was no wind now, not even the slightest breeze. That night, I made camp about 2 miles from the sinkhole, in a small clearing beside a different stream. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me. Every snapping twig or rustling leaf jerked me back to alertness. Around midnight, I finally drifted off, only to wake suddenly an hour later, heart pounding. Someone, or something, was walking around my tent. The footsteps were deliberate, unhurried, circling my small shelter with measured paces. They sounded human, yet somehow wrong. Too heavy, perhaps, or with an odd cadence that human steps shouldn't have. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, barely breathing, as they completed a full circuit around my tent. Then they stopped directly in front of the entrance. I clutched my hunting knife, the only weapon I'd brought, and waited for the tent flap to move. Instead, a voice spoke. A woman's voice, but distorted as if coming through water. "Jessica," it said, my name elongated into something barely recognizable. "Why did you come to my water?" A whimper escaped my throat before I could suppress it. The voice didn't sound like it came from a person standing outside my tent. It seemed to originate from directly beside my ear. "I didn't mean to disturb anything," I whispered, though I wasn't sure why I was responding. "I'll leave tomorrow. I'm sorry." A soft laugh like stones tumbling underwater. "But you took something that wasn't yours to take." "I didn't take anything." My voice trembled. "Just pictures." "Pictures take memories. Memories belong to the hollow." The temperature inside my tent plummeted. My breath fogged in front of my face and frost began to form on the inside of the rainfly. The voice came again, but now from multiple directions at once. "Return what you've taken. Come back to the water." Then silence fell, complete and sudden. The footsteps didn't retreat. They simply ceased. I sat awake until dawn, knife in hand, shivering from both cold and fear. When first light finally came, I forced myself out of the tent, half expecting to find footprints circling my campsite. The ground was undisturbed. No tracks, no signs that anything had approached during the night, but a thin layer of frost covered the forest floor in a perfect circle around my tent, despite the summer temperatures. I should have packed up and hiked out immediately. Any rational person would have. But something kept me there. A need to understand, perhaps, or something more insidious. I convinced myself that stress and isolation had triggered some sort of waking nightmare. I had no evidence that anything supernatural had occurred. The frost could be explained by some strange microclimate phenomenon. The voice was likely just my own fears talking to me in the dark. So, instead of leaving, I decided to hike to Bald River Falls, several miles away from the sinkhole, in the opposite direction. The moving water and tourist-frequented spot would be a welcome change from the oppressive silence of the hollow. The hike took longer than expected. Several times I found myself disoriented, the trails seeming to shift direction despite what my map showed. Twice I ended up back at the same lightning-struck oak, though I'd been certain I was walking a straight path away from it. By mid-afternoon, when I finally heard the distant rush of the falls, relief flooded through me. The falls were as beautiful as promised, 60 feet of white water cascading over moss-covered rocks into a clear pool below. A few day hikers milled about, taking photos and eating packed lunches. The normalcy was comforting. I found a sunny rock and unpacked my own lunch, feeling my tensions ease as I chatted with an elderly couple who were celebrating their 40th anniversary with a tour of Tennessee's waterfalls. As the couple moved on, I decided to check my camera, scrolling through the photos I'd taken the previous day. The forest shots were beautiful, sunlight filtering through leaves, interesting fungi, a startled deer. But when I reached the sinkhole photos, my blood turned cold. Where there should have been images of the unnaturally still pond, there were instead photos of myself. Not selfies. These were taken from several yards away, showing me standing at the edge of the sinkhole, looking down into the water. In each successive image, I was closer to the water, leaning farther over. In the final photo, a pale, waterlogged hand reached up from the black surface toward my own outstretched fingers. I dropped the camera, a strangled cry escaping my lips. A nearby hiker glanced over with concern. "You okay there, miss?" I couldn't form words. I just pointed at my camera, now lying face up on the rock. He picked it up curiously and looked at the screen. "Nice waterfall shot," he commented, turning the camera to show me. "You've got a good eye." The screen displayed a perfectly normal picture of Bald River Falls. Not me, not the sinkhole, not the reaching hand. I took the camera back with trembling fingers and quickly switched it off, mumbling thanks. The sun was beginning its descent, and the day hikers were packing up to leave. I should have gone with them, asked for a ride back to civilization. Instead, I set up camp in a designated area about a quarter-mile from the falls. There were 2 other tents nearby, a father and son on a fishing trip, and a solo hiker named Marcus who seemed friendly without being intrusive. That night, I slept soundly for the first time since entering the forest. The constant sound of the falls drowned out the smaller night noises that had kept me on edge, and the presence of other campers provided a sense of security. I woke refreshed, almost believing I could dismiss the previous night's experience as nothing more than an exhaustion-induced hallucination. Over breakfast, Marcus mentioned he was heading back toward the ranger station that day. He offered to wait if I wanted to hike out with him, an option that seemed increasingly appealing. I was packing up when my camera, tucked securely in my backpack, began to emit a sound. Not the usual digital beep, but a wet, gurgling noise that raised the hair on my arms. I unzipped the pack and found the camera dripping with water, though nothing else in the bag was wet. When I picked it up, black liquid oozed from the battery compartment and card slot. It smelled of rot and stagnant water. Marcus watched with wide eyes as I dropped the device back into my pack. "That's not normal," he said unnecessarily. "Just a malfunction," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I should probably head back too. Let me finish packing and I'll join you." "Sure thing, I'll wait by the trailhead." He seemed eager to put some distance between himself and whatever was happening with my camera. As soon as he was out of sight, I pulled the memory card from the sodden camera. Despite being submerged in the black liquid, it appeared undamaged. Something compelled me to keep it, to verify what I'd seen. I slipped it into my pocket and buried the ruined camera under some leaves, suddenly afraid to have it in my possession. I never made it to the trailhead where Marcus waited. Somehow, every path I took led me deeper into the forest, away from the falls, away from safety. The trails twisted in impossible ways. The sun jumped positions in the sky as if hours were passing in minutes. By late afternoon, I found myself standing once again at the edge of the Stillwater sinkhole, with no memory of how I'd arrived there. The black water was no longer still. It rippled continuously from the center outward, as if something beneath the surface was stirring. As I watched, frozen in place, the ripples changed direction, now moving from the edges toward the center, creating a subtle but unmistakable vortex. "You came back." The voice from the night before seemed to emanate from the water itself. "You brought what you took." My hand moved involuntarily toward my pocket, where the memory card pressed against my thigh through the fabric. "Why are you doing this?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The water rippled more vigorously. "I'm not doing anything, Jessica. You are. You always do." a figure began to rise from the center of the pond. A woman, her back to me, long dark hair plastered against pale skin. Water cascaded from her form as she slowly straightened. "Who are you?" I asked, though some deep part of me already knew the answer. The figure turned and I stared into my own face. But wrong. All wrong. The eyes were black pools, the skin gray and bloated. The lips moved unnaturally as it spoke with my voice. I'm what happens every time. What always happens. What will happen again. I stumbled backward, tripping over an exposed root and falling hard. The thing that wore my face began to move toward the shore, water sluicing from its body with each lurching step. "I don't understand," I gasped, scrambling backward on hands and feet like a crab. The hollow remembers even when you forget. My doppelganger's head tilted at an impossible angle. "How many times have you come here, Jessica? How many times have you been drawn back to these woods, to this water?" Memories not my own flooded my mind. Other summers, other hikes, always ending at this same pond, always ending with me walking into the black water pulled by something I couldn't resist. My body discovered days or weeks later, or sometimes not at all, a continuous cycle of death and return, playing out over and over across decades. "No," I whispered. "This is the first time I've been here. I would remember." The hollow keeps the memories. The thing smiled, a terrible stretching of gray flesh. "I keep them for you until you're ready to remember again." It was close now, water still dripping from its outstretched fingers. I forced myself to my feet and ran, crashing through undergrowth, abandoning the trail entirely. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me with every step, but terror kept me moving forward. Night fell with supernatural swiftness, plunging the forest into deep darkness. Still I ran, guided now only by instinct and the desperate need to put distance between myself and the thing from the pond. My lungs burned, muscles screamed in protest, but stopping wasn't an option. Eventually, physical limits forced me to slow. I found myself in an unfamiliar part of the forest, the trees more widely spaced, the underbrush thicker. No trail was visible. I had no idea which direction would lead to safety, but the bone-deep certainty that I was being pursued kept me moving. I stumbled upon a small, dilapidated cabin just before midnight. In my desperate state, the abandoned structure seemed like a fortress. The door hung askew on rusted hinges, and the single window was boarded over, but the roof appeared mostly intact. I ducked inside, hoping to hide until daylight. The interior smelled of mold and decay. Broken furniture littered the dirt floor, and something small scurried away into the shadows as I entered. Using my flashlight, I cleared a space in the corner farthest from the door and huddled there, back pressed against the rough log wall. Hours passed. Every sound from the forest outside sent fresh waves of adrenaline through my exhausted body. Sometime around what must have been 3 a.m., I heard the footsteps again. That same measured, unhurried pace now approaching the cabin. They stopped at the threshold. Silence stretched for what seemed an eternity. Then, a soft scraping sound as something moved across the doorway. Jessica. My name in my own voice, but wrong. You can't hide from yourself. I pressed a fist against my mouth to keep from screaming. My flashlight dimmed, then went out, plunging me into absolute darkness. Every summer, when the grief becomes too much to bear. The voice came from inside the cabin now, though I'd seen nothing enter. Every summer, when you convince yourself that solitude will heal you. Every summer, when you believe this time will be different. "Leave me alone," I whimpered into the darkness. "Please, just leave me alone." A figure materialized in the darkness. Not solid, but an absence of darkness like a photographic negative given form. It knelt before me, its featureless face inches from mine. You came to forget. But the water remembers. The hollow remembers. I remember. It reached for me, hands passing through my raised arms as if they were smoke. Cold spread through my chest as its fingers sank into me, reaching for something deep inside. "The boy wasn't your fault, Jessica." The voice was gentler now, almost kind. "Jason's death wasn't your failure." Hearing my student's name from this thing's lips broke something inside me. Rage replaced fear. I lashed out, my hands passing through its form but somehow disrupting it, causing it to waver and retreat. "Don't you dare say his name," I hissed, rising to my feet. "You don't get to use him against me." The figure solidified slightly, becoming more visible as a negative space in the darkness. It seemed surprised by my resistance. "You fight this time. That's new." "I'm not going to your pond. I'm not walking into that water." It made a sound like laughter, but hollow and echoing. "You already have, Jessica. Many times, and you will again. The hollow always calls its own back home." With sudden clarity, I remembered the memory card still in my pocket. I pulled it out, holding it up like a talisman. "Is this what you want? Take it and leave me alone." The figure reached for the card, its negative space fingers closing around it. As it did, its form began to change, solidity replacing the void, colors and features taking shape until my own face stared back at me. But this time, not the grotesque, waterlogged version. This was me as I might have been, eyes clear and posture straight, unburdened by guilt and grief. "You could stay," it said, its voice now indistinguishable from my own. "Join the others in the water. Let the hollow take your pain away." For a moment, the offer was tempting. To end the struggle, to stop fighting the pull of the sinkhole that had apparently drawn me back time after time. But something about seeing this idealized version of myself triggered a different response. "No," I said firmly, "I don't belong to the hollow. My pain is mine to bear and overcome." The doppelganger's expression hardened. "You'll be back. The hollow keeps what belongs to it." "Not this time," I insisted, though uncertainty gnawed at me. Had I said these very words before in previous summers? I couldn't remember. My double flickered like a faulty light, its edges blurring. "Dawn comes," it said, voice fading. "Remember or forget. The result will be the same." It dissolved into mist that seeped through the cracks in the cabin walls, leaving me alone in the darkness. I remained standing, afraid to move, until the first gray light of dawn filtered through the broken roof. Morning revealed the cabin to be even more decrepit than I'd realized. The roof, that had seemed mostly intact in the dark, now showed gaping holes, and what I'd taken for furniture was mostly collapsed sections of the walls and ceiling. Strangest of all was a small wooden table that remained standing in the center of the room, its surface covered with a fine layer of dirt except for one clear spot. A perfect handprint, smaller than my own, pressed into the dust. On the verge of collapse from exhaustion and fear, I nevertheless forced myself back into the forest. My pack and most of my supplies were lost, abandoned during my frantic flight the day before. I had only what remained in my pockets, a protein bar, my Swiss Army knife, and my nearly dead phone. I walked for hours, following the rising sun in hopes of heading east toward civilization. The forest seemed different in daylight, less threatening, more navigable. By mid-morning, I stumbled upon a marked trail, and by early afternoon, I found myself at a ranger outpost. The ranger on duty, a young woman named Eliza Murray, took one look at my scratched face and wild eyes and ushered me inside. She gave me water and asked calm professional questions about what had happened. I told her a sanitized version, that I'd gotten lost, panicked, and spent a night in an abandoned cabin before finding my way back. She nodded sympathetically. Whispering Hollow can be disorienting, even for experienced hikers. Something about the topography messes with your sense of direction. "The Stillwater sinkhole," I said, watching her reaction carefully. "What can you tell me about it?" Her professional demeanor slipped slightly. "You went there. It's marked as restricted on all official maps. I found it by accident, I lied. It felt wrong. Eliza glanced toward the door, as if checking we were alone. Local legend says it's a thin place, a spot where the boundary between our world and something else doesn't hold up so well. The Cherokee had stories about it. So did the settlers who came later. What kind of stories? She hesitated. Stories about people being drawn back there, summer after summer, about drownings that couldn't be explained. They say the hollow keeps a part of everyone who visits, especially those carrying grief or guilt. It uses that connection to pull them back. My blood ran cold. And the ranger who was here a few days ago? Older man, gave me a special map? Eliza's brow furrowed. We haven't had anyone matching that description working here for years. Only me and Ranger Collins, who's out on patrol. She must have seen the color drain from my face because she quickly added, "But hikers pass through all the time. Probably just someone being helpful?" I wasn't convinced, but I was too exhausted to pursue it further. Eliza arranged for a park vehicle to transport me back to my car at the main ranger station. Before I left, she handed me a small leather pouch on a cord. "Local tradition," she explained with a slightly embarrassed smile. "Salt, iron filings, and a bit of rowan wood. Supposed to break the hollow's hold. Most of us who work here carry one, just in case. Probably just superstition, but I took it gratefully and hung it around my neck. Thank you." The drive back to Nashville was a blur. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see my doppelganger in the back seat. When I finally reached my apartment, I went straight to my laptop and inserted the memory card from the sinkhole. It was empty. Not corrupted or damaged, simply empty, as if nothing had ever been recorded on it. I tried to return to normal life as summer wound down and the new school year approached. I told myself that stress, grief, and isolation had caused me to hallucinate or dream much of what I'd experienced. I threw away maps of Cherokee National Forest and deleted hiking websites from my bookmarks. But sometimes, I wake in the night to the sound of water dripping, though my apartment is dry. Sometimes I catch glimpses of my reflection with eyes that seem too dark, a smile that lingers too long. And when I dream of black water and a voice that calls me back to the hollow. I won't return. I can't return. I've moved to Arizona, a desert state, far from Tennessee's forests and sinkholes. I avoid bodies of water larger than my bathtub. I've changed my name and appearance. But still, I feel the pull. Still, I find myself researching summer hiking trails despite my conscious intentions. Still, I wake with mud on my feet that I can't explain. The hollow remembers, even when I try to forget. And I fear that one summer I'll find myself once again standing at the edge of that black water, unable to resist its call. One summer, there will be no escape, no cabin, no dawn rescue. One summer, the water will finally keep me. If you're reading this, and you're drawn to the solitude of remote forests, stay away from Whispering Hollow. Stay away from the Stillwater sinkhole. Some places in this world aren't meant for us, and some memories are best left undisturbed. The hollow always calls its own back home, and I'm terrified that, despite everything, I'll answer. My name is Laura Adams, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Cumberland Plateau near Fall Creek Falls State Park in Tennessee not too long ago. Just one weekend, I told myself as I packed my hiking gear, one weekend away from everything. After my divorce from Mark was finalized, I needed space to clear my head. The constant ping of emails and the suffocating pressure of well-meaning friends asking how I was holding up had become unbearable. I'd always loved hiking, but Mark had hated it. He preferred resorts with swim-up bars and all-inclusive packages. Now I could finally go back to the wilderness I missed, back to myself. I chose Fall Creek Falls State Park because it was far enough from Nashville to feel like an escape, but not so remote that I'd be completely alone. At least, that's what I thought. My therapy sessions with Dr. Wells had been focusing on reclaiming independence and finding myself again. When I mentioned wanting to go camping alone, she seemed hesitant but supportive. "Just make sure someone knows where you'll be," she had advised. I'd rolled my eyes then, but I did text my sister Elena my itinerary before leaving. The drive from Nashville took about 2 hours. When I arrived at the park's main entrance, I noticed there weren't many cars in the parking lot. September weekdays weren't peak season, which was exactly why I'd chosen this timing. The ranger at the entrance booth, a weathered man in his 60s with a name tag reading Bill, handed me a map after I paid the entrance fee. "Planning on doing some hiking?" he asked, eyeing my gear. "Yes, for a couple of days. I was thinking of taking the Savage Gulf Trail." His expression shifted slightly. "That's a beautiful area, but parts of it can be challenging. You hiking alone?" "I am." I tried to sound confident. Bill hesitated. "There's been some strange activity reported out near Devil Step Hollow, probably just teenagers messing around. But maybe stick to the marked trails closer to the campgrounds." "What kind of strange activity?" I asked, curiosity piqued. "Just some campers reporting their equipment being tampered with. One fella said his compass kept pointing south no matter which way he turned." Bill chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Probably just superstition. Folks get jumpy in the woods at night." I nodded, thanked him, and drove to the parking area nearest my chosen trailhead. As I shouldered my backpack and locked my car, I noticed a family packing up to leave. Parents with 2 young children, all looking exhausted and oddly tense. The father glanced my way, seemed to assess my solo status, and frowned. "Heading out alone," he called over. I nodded, feeling a flicker of annoyance. Would a male hiker get the same concerned looks? "You might want to stick to the western trails," he said, lowering his voice as he approached. "We were camping near Devil Step Hollow last night and—" He glanced back at his wife, who was busy strapping the younger child into a car seat. "Well, we didn't sleep much. Strange noises all night. Probably just animals, but it had the kids scared." I thanked him for the warning, but mentally filed it away with the ranger's caution. Just people being overprotective of a woman hiking alone. Still, I checked my bear spray was accessible in my pack's side pocket before setting off. The first few miles of the trail were exactly what I needed. Dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy of autumn-tinged leaves, the earthy scent of the forest floor, and the rhythmic crunch of my boots on the path. I felt my shoulders relax for the first time in months. The divorce, the tense negotiations over our shared possessions, the pitying looks from friends, all of it seemed to belong to another world. By mid-afternoon, I'd reached a junction in the trail. The left fork led toward the main campgrounds, the right continued deeper into the wilder part of the park, eventually leading to Devil Step Hollow. Despite the warnings, or perhaps because of them, I found myself drawn to the right. I'd come here to challenge myself, hadn't I? To prove I could make my own decisions again? The trail became steeper and less maintained as I continued. The forest around me changed character too. The trees grew closer together, older and more gnarled. The cheerful birdsong that had accompanied me earlier faded, replaced by the occasional rustle in the underbrush and the whisper of wind through leaves. I checked my phone. No service, as expected. My GPS app still worked, though, showing me exactly where I was on the trail map I'd downloaded. According to it, there was a small clearing another mile ahead that would make a perfect camping spot. I pushed on, determined to reach it before sunset. The clearing, when I found it, was not what I had expected. Rather than the open, welcoming space shown on my map, it was smaller and oddly wrong somehow. The trees around its perimeter seemed to lean inward, their branches creating a natural canopy that dimmed the already fading daylight. At the center was a fire ring made of stones arranged in a perfect circle, with no scattered rocks or signs of previous campers. It seemed almost staged, too perfect. Still, with darkness approaching, I had little choice. I set up my tent, gathered firewood, and got a small fire going. As I heated my dehydrated camping meal, I tried to shake off the unease that had settled over me. The silence was oppressive. No distant traffic noise, no planes overhead, not even many insects. Just the occasional crack of the fire and the soft sigh of wind. When my phone chimed with a low battery warning, I nearly jumped out of my skin. I switched it off to conserve the remaining power for emergencies and switched to my headlamp as darkness fell completely. That first night, I kept telling myself the sounds were normal forest noises, the scratching against my tent, branches in the wind, the distant echoing cry that sounded almost human, probably an owl or fox, the sensation of being watched, just my imagination, heightened by solitude. I barely slept. When dawn finally broke, I seriously considered packing up and heading back, but stubbornness has always been my downfall. I'd planned this trip, and I wasn't going to let some night noises scare me away. Besides, in the morning light, the clearing seemed less threatening. Birds were singing again, and a squirrel darted across the ground near my tent. After breakfast, I decided to continue deeper into the wilderness. The trail map showed Devil Step Hollow was only another 3 miles ahead, and despite the warnings, I was curious. What was so special about this place that had everyone on edge? The trail grew increasingly difficult as I hiked. What should have been a well-marked path according to my map kept seeming to shift and fade, requiring me to double back several times. The 3 miles stretched into 5 as I navigated around fallen trees and unclear sections. The forest grew denser, darker despite the mid-morning sun. It was around noon when I realized I hadn't seen or heard any wildlife for over an hour. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. The silence was complete except for my own breathing and footsteps. I stopped to check my GPS and found that the app was glitching, showing me in a completely different location than where I should be. I tried restarting my phone, but when it came back on, the battery had dropped to 15% despite being at 70% moments before. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cool autumn air. I was lost. Not completely. I knew the general direction back to my campsite, but the specific trails weren't matching my map anymore. I took a deep breath, remembering my wilderness training. Stay calm, pick a direction, and stick with it. I chose to press on toward where Devil Step Hollow should be, marking trees with small strips of biodegradable trail tape as I went. After another hour of hiking, the terrain changed dramatically. The forest opened up to reveal a limestone bluff overlooking a deep ravine, and there, carved into the rock face across the ravine, was what had to be Devil Step Hollow, a yawning cave entrance nearly 30 feet high. Even from across the ravine, something about the cave entrance disturbed me. The rock surrounding it seemed to be stained dark, almost black, in streaks that looked uncomfortably like massive claw marks. I raised my camera to take a photo and found that it wouldn't turn on despite having charged the battery the night before. I scanned the ravine and spotted a path leading down and across. It was steep but manageable. Something pulled me toward that cave, a curiosity I couldn't explain even to myself. I started down carefully, using trees and exposed roots as handholds. At the bottom of the ravine ran a stream, clear and cold. I refilled my water bottle, using my purification tablets. As I knelt by the water, I noticed something partially buried in the silt of the stream bed. A small, leather-bound book, its pages swollen with moisture but somehow not completely ruined. I pulled it out and carefully opened it. Most of the ink had run, making the writing illegible, but a few passages remained clear enough to read. April 17th. Found the hollow today. E says we shouldn't camp here, but I insist. The legends can't be true. April 18th. Strange dreams. E heard someone calling her name from inside the cave. I told her it was the wind. April 19th. The markings on the cave walls aren't weathering. They're too deliberate. E refuses to go near the hollow now. Says she sees someone standing in the entrance at night. A woman, but wrong somehow. The last legible entry sent a chill down my spine. April 21st. E is gone. Woke up and her sleeping bag was empty. Found her boots still by the fire. The whispers from the cave are louder now. They know my name, too. I dropped the journal as if it had burned me. A rational voice in my head said this was probably some creative writing project dropped by another hiker, or even a prank. But my instincts were screaming at me to turn back. I looked up at the cave entrance across the stream. Was it my imagination, or had it grown darker? The sun was still high overhead, but the cave mouth seemed to absorb the light around it. And was that movement inside? A shifting in the darkness? "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting breaking the silence. My voice echoed strangely, seeming to multiply and distort as it bounced off the ravine walls. "Hello, hello, Ello, lo, oh, Laura, ora, ora." I froze. I hadn't called out my name. "Who's there?" I tried to sound authoritative, but my voice betrayed me with a tremor. No response came, but I could have sworn the darkness in the cave entrance shifted again, like a curtain being drawn aside ever so slightly. I stumbled backward, nearly falling into the stream. Fear finally overrode curiosity, and I turned to climb back up the ravine path. As I climbed, I felt the distinct sensation of being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I resisted the urge to look back until I reached the top. When I finally did turn around, I wished I hadn't. A figure stood at the cave entrance now, too distant to make out clearly, but unmistakably the silhouette of a woman. She was unnaturally tall and thin, her proportions wrong in ways I couldn't quite define, and she was perfectly still facing my direction. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran back into the forest following my trail markers. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The forest that had seemed merely unsettling before now felt actively malevolent. Branches seemed to reach for me, roots rose to trip my feet, and the trail markers I'd left were increasingly difficult to find. The 3-hour hike to Devil Step Hollow somehow took only 1 hour in retreat. By late afternoon, I stumbled back into my campsite, breathless and terrified. Nothing had visibly changed, but the clearing felt different now. The circle of stones in the fire pit seemed to have shifted slightly, and my tent was unzipped. I was certain I'd zipped it closed before leaving. I approached cautiously, wishing I'd brought something more substantial than bear spray for protection. When I peered inside, I found my sleeping bag had been laid out neatly, too neatly, as if someone had been preparing it for me. On top of the sleeping bag lay a small bundle of dried flowers and twigs, bound with what looked like human hair. I backed away, then stopped as I noticed something else. On a tree at the edge of the clearing, at exactly eye level, someone had carved a single word: "Stay." My hands shook as I quickly packed up my tent and supplies. The sun was already beginning to set, and I knew hiking out in darkness would be dangerous, but staying felt impossible. I'd rather risk the trail than spend another night here. As I shouldered my now hastily packed backpack, a voice spoke from directly behind me. "You shouldn't leave now. Night's coming." I spun around. A scream caught in my throat. An old woman stood at the edge of the clearing. She hadn't been there seconds before. I was certain of it. She was small and wiry, dressed in what looked like homemade clothes, a long skirt and shawl made of rough-spun fabric. Her face was deeply lined, her eyes a pale, almost colorless blue. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "Folks around here call me Widow Blackwood," she said, her accent thick with the mountains. "But that ain't important. What's important is you getting yourself away from Devil Step Hollow after dark." "I'm trying to leave," I said, gesturing to my packed gear. She shook her head. "Not the clearing. The whole hollow. You've been marked now. She's caught your scent." A cold weight settled in my stomach. "She? Who are you talking about?" The old woman's pale eyes seemed to look through me rather than at me. "The woman in the cave. The hungry one. She's been there longer than these mountains, some say. Feeds on the lost, and you, girl, are very lost." I wanted to dismiss her as a local trying to scare the city girl, but something in her eyes told me she believed every word, and after what I'd seen at the cave— "How do I get away?" I asked, dropping all pretense of skepticism. "You don't. Not tonight. She walks the forest paths after sunset, hunting. Your only hope is to stay put, keep your fire burning till dawn, and don't answer if you hear voices calling, especially if they sound like someone you know." Before I could ask more questions, she turned and walked into the trees. I called after her, but she disappeared as suddenly as she had appeared. I stood alone in the clearing, the last rays of sunlight fading quickly. I had maybe 20 minutes of daylight left, not enough time to hike back to the main trail, let alone to my car. With shaking hands, I unpacked my tent again and set it up, gathering as much firewood as I could before darkness fell completely. That night was the longest of my life. I kept the fire blazing, feeding it with manic determination. The darkness beyond my small circle of firelight seemed absolute, pressing in from all sides. And the sounds. God, the sounds. It started with whispers just at the edge of hearing, wordless at first, then gradually forming into something that almost made sense. Then came the footsteps, circling the clearing but never quite entering the light of my fire, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes sounding like multiple sets. Around midnight, I heard Elena's voice. Laura, help me. I came looking for you and I fell. I think my leg is broken." It was her voice exactly, the same inflection, the same slight rasp from her years of smoking. But Elena was in Nashville, safe in her apartment. I remembered the old woman's warning and gripped the bear spray tightly, saying nothing. "Laura, please, I can see your fire. I'm so cold." Her voice broke on a sob that nearly shattered my resolve. I bit down on my knuckles until I tasted blood. The voice came closer. "Why won't you help me? Don't you love me anymore?" And then it changed, becoming something else, a wet, gurgling sound that no human throat could make. I curled into a ball beside my fire, hands over my ears, rocking back and forth until it finally stopped. But that wasn't the worst. Around 3 a.m, when my fire was beginning to die despite my efforts, I saw her. At first, just a flicker of movement between the trees, but then she stepped forward just enough for the firelight to catch her. The woman in the cave. The hungry one. She was tall, at least 7 feet, and impossibly thin, her limbs too long and jointed in too many places. Her skin was a pallid gray-white, like cave stone, and seemed to shift and ripple as if something moved beneath it. Her face was almost human but stretched and distorted, with a mouth that split her head nearly in half. But her eyes were the worst part. They reflected the firelight like an animal's, but with an intelligence that was terrifyingly aware. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. I could feel her hunger like a physical force pressing against me, squeezing the air from my lungs. She wanted me to run, wanted to chase me through the dark forest until I was exhausted and hopeless. I don't know where I found the courage, but I stood up, made myself as tall as possible, and stared back at her. My entire body trembled, but I held my ground. "No," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "This is my fire, my place. You can't have me." She tilted her head at an impossible angle, studying me with those reflective eyes. For one terrible moment I thought she would lunge forward, fire or no fire. But then she smiled, her face splitting even wider, and stepped back into the darkness. She didn't leave, though. I could feel her watching for the rest of the night, waiting for my fire to die or my resolve to break. I fed every scrap of wood I had to the flames and didn't move from my spot until the first pale light of dawn broke through the trees. When sunrise finally came, I didn't waste a moment. I packed up and practically ran down the trail toward the main campground. I didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't even pause to rest until I reached areas where other hikers were present. The ranger station was just opening when I arrived at the main area of the park. Bill was there, eyebrows rising in surprise when he saw me. "You okay, miss? You look like you've had a rough night." I tried to explain what had happened: the cave, the old woman, the thing in the night, but even as I spoke, I could see disbelief settling into his expression. "Widow Blackwood, you said?" he asked when I finished. I nodded. He exchanged glances with another ranger. "Ma'am, there hasn't been anyone by that name around these parts for nearly 50 years. Old Martha Blackwood was found dead in these woods back in the 70s. They say she went crazy after her husband disappeared near Devil Step Hollow." My blood ran cold. "That's impossible. I talked to her. She warned me about the woman in the cave." Bill's expression softened with pity. "A lot of folks get spooked camping alone. The mind plays tricks in the dark." I wanted to argue, to make him understand, but what proof did I have? My camera hadn't worked. My phone had died. And now, in the bright light of day, even I was starting to doubt what I'd experienced. Until Bill said, almost as an afterthought, "Funny you should mention Devil Step Hollow, though. We had a hiker go missing near there about 2 months back. Young woman, hiking alone, just like you. Her boyfriend reported her missing when she didn't come home. Search teams never found a trace." "What was her name?" I asked, though I already knew the answer somehow. "Elizabeth," he said. "Elizabeth Morris." E from the journal. I left Fall Creek Falls that day and drove straight back to Nashville. When I got home, I found a small bundle of dried flowers and twigs on my doorstep, bound with a single long strand of hair. I moved away from Tennessee the following week. I don't hike alone anymore. I don't go into the woods at all if I can help it, because sometimes, late at night, I still hear whispers calling my name. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see her, the woman in the cave, with her too wide smile and hungry, reflecting eyes. And I know she's still waiting for me to return. My name is Ryan Nelson, and I am 28 years old. This happened in the summer of 2023, in the remote wilderness area of South Cumberland State Park in Tennessee. I never wanted to talk about it, but I know now that I have to. Maybe someone will learn from my mistakes. My girlfriend Melissa and I were avid hikers. We'd been together for 3 years, and our shared love of the outdoors was what brought us together in the first place. Melissa was smart, determined, and fearless, sometimes to a fault. She had this infectious energy that pushed me beyond my comfort zone. I was more cautious by nature, always planning our routes meticulously and checking weather forecasts obsessively. We decided to take a week-long backpacking trip through the Savage Gulch area of South Cumberland State Park. It's known for its rugged terrain, deep gorges, waterfalls, and some of the most remote hiking trails in Tennessee. The main attraction is the Stone Door, a 10-foot wide, 100-foot deep crack in the cliff that resembles an open door. Native Americans used it as a passage between the bottom of the gorge and the plateau above. The plan was to hike the Big Creek Gulch Trail, camp for a few nights, and then loop back through the Stone Door and Collins Gulch trails. We'd read about the area's beauty online, but also about how dangerous it could be if you strayed from the marked paths. The rangers warned visitors every year about getting lost in the dense forest. We arrived at the Savage Gulch Ranger Station on a Monday morning in late June. The air was thick with humidity, and the forecast predicted scattered thunderstorms later in the week. Nothing we couldn't handle, we thought. The ranger who checked our permits was an older man named Bill. His weathered face crinkled with concern when we mentioned our planned route. "You folks familiar with this area?" he asked, eyes narrowing slightly. "We've done our research," Melissa said confidently. "Plus, we've got GPS and trail maps." Bill nodded slowly. "Technology fails out there sometimes. Something about the rocks and the gorges interferes with signals." He paused, seeming to debate whether to continue. "Just stay on the marked trails, all right? People have gone missing in these woods." I felt a chill despite the summer heat, but Melissa just laughed it off. "Don't worry, we're experienced." Bill handed back our permits. "One more thing," he said quietly. "If you hear anything strange at night, voices or such, just stay in your tent till morning. Probably just other hikers, but sound carries funny in the hollows." We thanked him and headed out. As we walked away, I glanced back to see him still watching us, a worried expression on his face. The first day of hiking was uneventful but beautiful. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds and insects, and shafts of sunlight broke through the dense canopy overhead. Melissa kept stopping to photograph interesting plants or rock formations. By late afternoon, we reached our first campsite near a small creek. We set up our tent, cooked a simple dinner on our portable stove, and watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. That night, I slept fitfully. The forest was never truly silent. There were always leaves rustling, animals moving in the underbrush, the creek bubbling nearby. But sometime after midnight, I woke to a different sound: whispering. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, just at the edge of comprehensibility. I strained to make out words, but couldn't. "Melissa," I whispered, gently shaking her. "Do you hear that?" She groaned and turned over. "It's just the wind, Ryan. Go back to sleep." But it wasn't the wind. The air was still, and the sound had cadence, rhythm, like someone, or several someones, having a hushed conversation just outside our tent. I remembered Bill's warning and pulled my sleeping bag tighter around me, eventually drifting back to sleep. The next morning was bright and clear. I mentioned the whispering to Melissa over breakfast. "You were probably dreaming," she said, munching on her granola bar. I didn't hear anything. We packed up and continued on the Big Creek Gulch Trail. The path gradually descended into the gorge, becoming steeper and more challenging. Massive rock formations loomed on either side, and the forest grew denser, older somehow. The trees here were ancient, their gnarled roots snaking across the path like arthritic fingers. Around midday, we stopped for lunch near a small waterfall. As we sat eating our trail mix and jerky, Melissa suddenly froze, staring into the trees behind me. "What?" I asked, turning to look. "I thought I saw someone," she said quietly. "Just for a second. A girl with long dark hair, watching us." I scanned the forest but saw nothing except trees and shadows. "Probably another hiker." "Maybe," Melissa said, but she sounded uncertain. But she was just standing there. And then she was gone. We finished our lunch in silence and continued hiking. The trail grew more difficult as we descended deeper into the gorge. The air felt heavier, almost oppressive, and despite the tree cover, the heat was stifling. My shirt clung to my back with sweat, and we had to stop frequently to drink water. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered overhead, and the distant rumble of thunder warned of an approaching storm. We needed to find our planned campsite quickly. "The map says there should be a clearing near Big Creek, about half a mile ahead," I said, checking our position. As we hurried along, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. Occasionally, I'd catch movement from the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there, just trees swaying in the increasing wind. The storm hit just as we reached the clearing. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by deafening thunder. We hastily set up our tent as rain began to pour down, soaking us to the skin. Inside the tent, we changed into dry clothes and huddled together, listening to the storm rage outside. "Some vacation, huh?" Melissa joked, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Something about this place had her on edge, too. The storm continued well into the night. Our tent held, but the ground beneath us turned muddy and uncomfortable. Again, I woke in the darkness to that whispering sound. This time, it seemed closer, more insistent, and underneath it, barely audible, was a soft, rhythmic tapping. Tap, 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 tap. "Melissa," I whispered more urgently this time. "Wake up." She stirred beside me. "What is it?" "Listen." We both lay still. The whispering continued, rising and falling like distant conversation, and that tapping persisted. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. "What is that?" Melissa breathed. "I don't know." I reached for my flashlight but hesitated. Part of me didn't want to know what was out there. Suddenly, the tapping stopped. The whispering faded. Then, unmistakably, we heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling our tent. Melissa gripped my arm so tightly it hurt. Neither of us dared to speak or move. The footsteps completed one circle, then began another. Closer this time. A shadow passed across our tent wall, a silhouette illuminated by the occasional flash of lightning. It wasn't the shape of a person, not exactly. The proportions were wrong, limbs too long, head too small. Then, a voice. Not whispering now, but clear and childlike. "Come out and play with me." Melissa's fingernails dug into my arm. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "Come out," the voice repeated, closer to the tent flap now. "I'm so lonely here." "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking. "This isn't funny?" There was a pause, then a soft giggle that raised the hair on my neck. "My name is Emma," the voice said. "I've been waiting for you." A small hand pressed against the outside of our tent, directly opposite my face. The fabric pushed inward, outlining 5 tiny fingers, then another hand, then another, and another. Hands all over the tent, pressing, pushing. "Jesus Christ," Melissa gasped. I fumbled for my flashlight and switched it on, aiming it at the tent wall. The hands cast shadows but didn't retreat. If anything, they pressed harder. "Go away!" I shouted, my voice breaking with fear. The hands suddenly withdrew. Silence fell, broken only by our ragged breathing and the patter of rain. "Is it gone?" Melissa whispered after several minutes. I swallowed hard. "I don't know." We sat awake for the rest of the night, backs pressed together, flashlights in hand. Neither of us spoke much. What was there to say? We'd both experienced something impossible. Dawn came slowly, gray light filtering through the tent fabric. The rain had stopped, but everything was soaked through. We emerged cautiously, half expecting to see a child, or something worse, waiting for us. The clearing was empty, but the ground around our tent was marked with dozens of small footprints that didn't match either of our boots. They circled the tent multiple times, then led off into the dense underbrush. "We need to leave," I said, staring at those tiny impressions in the mud. "Now," Melissa nodded, her face pale. "Back to the ranger station." I checked the map. "That's a 1.5-day hike back the way we came, but there's a shorter route if we cut through Collins Gulf to the stone door. We could be back at civilization by nightfall." "Let's do that," she agreed quickly. We packed up in record time, not bothering with breakfast. As I was collapsing the tent, I noticed something scratched into a nearby tree trunk. Crude, childish letters spelling out Emma, and below it, a simple stick figure with unnaturally long arms. I didn't point it out to Melissa. The shortcut meant leaving the marked trail, something Bill had specifically warned against. But the thought of spending another night in these woods was unbearable. We oriented ourselves using the map and compass. Our phones had died overnight, despite being fully charged the previous day, and set off in what we hoped was the right direction. The forest seemed different in the aftermath of the storm. Darker, more primeval. The ground was treacherous with mud and hidden roots. Twice, Melissa slipped and fell, cursing as she got back to her feet. We pushed on, determined to reach the stone door before dark. Around midday, we stopped in a small clearing to rest and eat something. The clouds had cleared and sunlight dappled the forest floor. In the daylight, last night's terror seemed almost absurd. Maybe we'd imagined it all, a shared hallucination brought on by exhaustion and the strange acoustics of the gorge. "Do you think we actually saw something last night?" Melissa asked, voicing my thoughts. "Or was it just the storm playing tricks on us?" I considered lying to make her feel better, but couldn't. Those footprints were real. She nodded slowly. And that voice... She shuddered. "Who's Emma, do you think?" "Probably just a local legend. You know, like the Hook Hand Man or Bloody Mary. Something to scare tourists." "Maybe." She didn't sound convinced. We finished eating and continued our hike. The terrain grew increasingly difficult as we tried to navigate without a proper trail. The forest was thicker here, untamed. Several times we had to backtrack when our path was blocked by impenetrable thickets or steep drops. By late afternoon, I was forced to admit we were lost. The map showed the stone door should be nearby, but we couldn't find it. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, and with it, my hope of reaching safety before nightfall. "We need to set up camp," I finally said, defeated. "We can try again in the morning." Melissa looked around nervously but nodded. We found a relatively flat area and began unpacking our tent. As I hammered in the stakes, I noticed the silence. The forest, which had been alive with bird calls and insect noises all day, had gone completely quiet. "Ryan," Melissa said softly, staring into the trees. "There's someone watching us." I straightened up slowly, following her gaze. At first, I saw nothing. Then, movement. A pale figure partially hidden behind a distant tree. A child, it seemed, with long dark hair. "Hello?" I called out. "Are you lost?" The figure didn't respond but retreated slightly behind the tree. "It's okay," Melissa said, her voice gentler than I'd heard it in a long time. "We won't hurt you. Are you Emma?" At the mention of that name, the figure stepped partially into view. It was indeed a little girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, wearing what looked like a dirty white nightgown. Her face was partially obscured by her hair, but I could see she was unnaturally pale. "How do you know my name?" the girl asked, her voice echoing strangely in the silent forest. Melissa and I exchanged glances. "You told us," I said carefully. "Last night, at our tent." The girl tilted her head. "I've been waiting for you to come back," she said. "It's been so long." "Come back?" Melissa repeated. "We've never been here before." The girl stepped fully out from behind the tree, and I had to stifle a gasp. Her feet didn't touch the ground. She hovered an inch or two above the forest floor, her nightgown swaying gently though there was no breeze. "Not you," she said, pointing at me with an impossibly long, thin finger. "Him. Daddy." A cold sweat broke out across my skin. "I'm not your father," I said, my voice shaking. "My name is Ryan." The girl's face contorted with sudden rage. "Liar!" she shrieked, the sound piercing and inhuman. "You left me here. You left me to die." She shot forward with impossible speed, crossing the clearing in a blur. Melissa screamed and stumbled backward, tripping over our half-assembled tent. I threw up my arms instinctively, but the girl stopped just short of me, her face inches from mine. Up close, I could see that what I'd taken for paleness was actually a gray-blue tinge to her skin. Her eyes were milky white without pupils or irises, and her teeth visible through cracked, dry lips, were needle-sharp. "You promised you'd come back," she whispered, her breath like the grave. "You promised, Daddy." Then she vanished, simply winked out of existence like a light being switched off. Melissa was sobbing, still tangled in the tent fabric. I helped her up, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip her arm. "We need to run," she gasped between sobs. "Now." I couldn't have agreed more, but darkness was falling rapidly, and we had no idea which direction to go. Running blindly through the forest at night would be suicide. "We have to stay here," I said, though the words tasted like ash in my mouth. "We've got the tent, our supplies. We'll be safer together." Melissa shook her head frantically. "You saw that thing. It wasn't human, Ryan. It wasn't even alive." "I know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But we don't have a choice. We can't navigate in the dark." After much persuasion, Melissa helped me finish setting up the tent. We gathered extra firewood and built the largest campfire we could manage, hoping it would keep whatever that thing was at bay. We ate a cold dinner, neither of us willing to look away from the surrounding darkness long enough to cook. As full night descended, the whispering returned. It seemed to come from all directions, countless voices overlapping. Occasionally we'd catch fragments. "Come play," "Daddy's home," "So hungry." We sat by the fire, backs pressed together, knives in hand. Sleep was out of the question. "What did she mean, you left her to die?" Melissa asked after a long silence. "I don't know," I said truthfully. "I've never been here before. I've never had a child." "Maybe you look like someone who did," Melissa suggested. "Someone who abandoned their daughter in these woods." The thought made me sick. Who would do that? "People do terrible things," she said quietly. The night dragged on endlessly. Several times we caught glimpses of Emma at the edge of our firelight, watching, waiting. Other times we'd see only a pair of milky white eyes reflecting the flames. The whispering never stopped. Around what must have been midnight, our fire began to sputter and dim despite the ample wood we'd gathered. The flames turned an unnatural blue, giving off light but little heat. "That's not possible," Melissa whispered, staring at the ghostly fire. From the darkness beyond came a sound I'll never forget, a high, keening wail that was both childlike and ancient. It built in intensity until we had to cover our ears, then cut off abruptly. In the silence that followed, we heard it. Footsteps. Not the light patter of a child, but heavy, deliberate thuds. Something large was moving toward us from the trees. A figure shambled into the edge of our fading firelight. It was a man, or had been once. His clothes were rotted and hanging in tatters from a gaunt frame. His skin had the same gray-blue tinge as the girl's, but was pulled tight over his skull, giving him a cadaverous appearance, and his eyes, the same milky blindness as Emma's. "She's been waiting for you, Mr. Holloway," the thing said, its voice a dry rasp. "We've all been waiting." I stood up, putting myself between the apparition and Melissa. "My name is Ryan Nelson. I don't know any Holloway." The thing tilted its head, exactly as Emma had done. "The blood remembers, even if you don't," it said. "The sin passes down. Someone must pay." "Pay for what?" Melissa demanded, her voice stronger than I expected. The thing's mouth stretched into a grotesque smile. "For Emma. For all the children of Deep Hollow." More figures emerged from the darkness, men and women in various states of decay, all with those same milky eyes. They formed a loose circle around our campsite, swaying slightly. "What do you want from us?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "Justice," the first thing said. "A life for a life. The Holloway bloodline must end." Emma appeared suddenly among them, her tiny hand slipping into the larger one of the cadaverous man. "It's time to play, Daddy," she said sweetly. The blue flames of our fire died completely, plunging us into darkness. Melissa screamed as something grabbed her from behind. I lunged toward the sound of her voice, but cold hands seized my arms, holding me in place. "Ryan!" Melissa cried out. I could hear her struggling, the sounds growing fainter as she was dragged away. "Melissa!" I shouted, fighting against the iron grip of the things holding me. "Leave her alone." "She's not part of this," Emma's voice came from the darkness, "but we need her to make you understand, to make you feel what I felt." I was forced to my knees, my arms painfully twisted behind my back. A cold hand gripped my chin, tilting my face upward. In the faint moonlight that now filtered through the trees, I could see Emma floating before me, her face inches from mine. "Your great-grandfather built the logging camp at Deep Hollow," she said, her voice echoing strangely. "He worked the men to death, worked the children too." Images flashed in my mind, not memories, but vivid visions. A brutal logging operation in these very woods. Men, women, and children laboring under horrific conditions. Accidents, deaths, bodies buried in unmarked graves. "When we tried to leave, he hunted us down," Emma continued. "Said we owed him, said we belonged to him." More visions. Families fleeing in the night, being tracked through the forest by men with dogs and guns. Captured. Punished. "I was the last one he caught," Emma whispered. "He didn't want to waste a bullet, so he left me here, in a hole in the ground. Said if I could climb out, I could go free." The final vision showed a small hole dug into a hillside. A child, Emma, being forced inside. A man with my eyes and jawline covering the entrance with a heavy stone, ignoring her screams and pleas. "I died in the dark," Emma said, "alone, scared, calling for my papa who never came." The visions faded, leaving me gasping and sick. "I'm sorry," I choked out, "but that wasn't me. I didn't do those things." "Blood calls to blood," the cadaverous man said from somewhere in the darkness. "Sin echoes through generations. The debt must be paid." "Where's Melissa?" I demanded. "What have you done with her?" "She's where I was," Emma said, her face splitting into that terrible smile again. "In the deep hollow, waiting to see if anyone will save her." Dawn found me stumbling through the forest, led by Emma and her grotesque companions. They had released me at first light, telling me I had until sunset to find Melissa and free her. If I failed, she would suffer the same fate as Emma had a century ago. They had taken my backpack, my water, my phone. All I had was the clothes on my back and a small pocket knife they'd overlooked. Emma floated ahead of me, occasionally looking back with those milky eyes, making sure I followed. "How am I supposed to find her?" I asked, my voice hoarse from shouting Melissa's name through the night. "You'll know," Emma replied cryptically. "The blood remembers." We walked for hours. The forest grew older, darker. The trees here were massive, primeval things with thick, gnarled trunks. No trails, no signs of human passage, just wilderness, untamed and indifferent to my desperation. My head pounded with dehydration, and my stomach cramped with hunger and fear. But worse than the physical discomfort was the knowledge that Melissa was somewhere in these woods, trapped and terrified, counting on me to find her. Around midday, Emma stopped at the edge of a small clearing. In the center stood a moss-covered stone obelisk, about 4 feet tall. "This is where it happened," she said. "This is Deep Hollow." I approached the obelisk cautiously. Carved into its face were words, almost worn away by time and weather. Holloway Timber Cuddyard, 1897-1903. "My family owned this company?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Emma nodded. "Your blood built a fortune on our suffering." I looked around the clearing, seeing no sign of any hole or place Melissa might be trapped. "Where is she?" Emma pointed to the stone obelisk. "Under." My blood ran cold. "She's buried under that?" "Not yet," Emma said, her voice suddenly childlike again. but she will be when the sun sets. I fell to my knees beside the obelisk and began digging at its base with my bare hands. The soil was surprisingly loose, giving way easily. After a few minutes of frantic digging, my fingers struck something hard, not stone, but wood. Clearing away more dirt revealed a trapdoor with an iron ring. I pulled with all my strength, and it swung upward with a groan of ancient hinges. Below was darkness, a shaft descending into the earth. A crude ladder of rotting wood led downward. "Melissa?" I called into the blackness. "Can you hear me?" "Ryan." Her voice drifted up, weak but alive. "Oh, God. Ryan, get me out of here." "I'm coming," I promised, already lowering myself onto the ladder. "Careful," Emma said from above. "The ladder is old, like the one I tried to climb." The descent was harrowing. Twice, rungs broke under my weight, leaving me dangling by my arms. The shaft descended about 20 feet before opening into a small chamber, a root cellar or storage room from the logging camp. Perhaps. Melissa was huddled in a corner, her face streaked with dirt and tears. Her left ankle was swollen and purple. "You came," she sobbed as I rushed to her. "They said you wouldn't, that you'd leave me like he left her." I held her tightly, relief washing over me. "I'll always come for you. Can you climb?" She shook her head. "I think my ankle's broken. They threw me down here in the dark." I glanced up at the shaft. Even with 2 good legs, the climb would be challenging. With an injured companion, it might be impossible. "I'll carry you," I said, though I had no idea how I'd manage it. Somehow. Above, Emma's face appeared at the opening, silhouetted against the sky. "Time's running out," she called down. "The sun is getting low." I helped Melissa to her feet, letting her lean on me. "We're coming," I shouted up to Emma. "She's hurt. I need help." "No one helped me," Emma replied dispassionately. Desperation gave me strength. I positioned myself under Melissa, getting her onto my back in a piggyback carry. Her weight nearly drove me to my knees, but I staggered to the ladder. "Hold on to me," I instructed, "as tight as you can." The ascent was agonizing. Each rung threatened to break under our combined weight. My muscles screamed in protest. Several times we nearly fell, but inch by excruciating inch we climbed toward the light. Near the top, disaster struck. A rung snapped beneath my foot and we lurched downward. Melissa screamed as she began to slip from my back. I clung to the ladder with one hand and caught her wrist with the other, my shoulder nearly dislocating from the sudden strain. "Don't let go," she begged, dangling above the 20-foot drop. "Never," I grunted, though my fingers were already slipping. A small, cold hand closed around my wrist. Looking up, I saw Emma leaning into the shaft, her ghostly face intent. She was helping us. With her supernatural strength aiding mine, I pulled Melissa upward until she could grab the edge of the trap door. Together, we hauled ourselves out of the pit and collapsed on the forest floor, gasping. The sun was touching the treetops now, painting the clearing in gold and shadow. Emma stood watching us, her expression unreadable. "Why did you help us?" I asked when I could speak again. "You came back for her," Emma said simply. "He never came back for me." The other ghostly figures had materialized at the edge of the clearing, watching silently. "The debt remains," the cadaverous man said. "Blood calls to blood." I struggled to my feet, standing protectively over Melissa. "I acknowledge what my ancestor did to you," I said. "It was unforgivable, evil, but punishing me or Melissa won't undo it." "No," Emma agreed, "but it might end it." She glided forward, those tiny spectral hands reaching toward me. I stood my ground, too exhausted to run, too determined to leave Melissa. Emma's cold fingers touched my face, and visions flooded my mind again, but different this time. I saw Emma alive, playing with other children. I saw her father, a kind-faced man, nothing like the monster in the previous visions. I saw her mother singing her to sleep. "Your ancestor took everything from me," Emma whispered. My life, my future, even my true memories, replaced with terror and pain. Her hands dropped away and the visions faded. I want to rest, she said, suddenly sounding like the child she'd been. All of us do, but we can't. Not while his blood lives on, carrying his sin. Then tell me how to free you, I said. There must be a way to make this right. Emma turned to the cadaverous man who nodded slowly. Acknowledge the crime, he said. Speak it aloud here, where it happened. Make it known. I took a deep breath. I acknowledge that my ancestor, a Holloway, committed atrocities here. He enslaved people, worked them to death, murdered children. He buried his crimes and his victims here in Deep Hollow. And, Emma prompted, and I'm sorry, I continued. I can't undo what he did, but I swear I'll make it known. I'll find records, locate your remains, give you proper burials and recognition. Your stories won't be forgotten again. As I spoke, a change came over the ghostly figures. The milky film over their eyes began to clear, revealing human eyes beneath. Sad, tired, but no longer vengeful. It's a start, the cadaverous man said, his voice softer now. But promises are just words. Then take something from me, I offered. Something binding. Emma floated forward again. Your blood, she said. A small price compared to what was taken from us. I didn't hesitate. Taking my pocket knife, I cut my palm and let the blood drip onto the obelisk in the ground around it. I swear on my blood, I said. Your stories will be told. Justice, even if late, will be done. The ghosts began to fade as twilight deepened around us. Last to disappear was Emma, who smiled. A real child's smile this time, not the grotesque parody from before. We'll be watching, Ryan Nelson, she said as she faded. Don't forget us again. Then they were gone. The forest sounds returned, insects chirping, leaves rustling, normal nighttime noises. Melissa and I spent that night beside the obelisk, too exhausted to move. In the morning, we found ourselves mysteriously back on a marked trail, the ranger station visible in the distance. That was 6 months ago. True to my word, I've spent every free moment researching the Holloway Timber Company and its operations in the Savage Gulf area. I've found records, old newspaper articles, even a journal kept by one of the workers. It's all there. The abuses, the deaths, the disappearances explained away as desertion. I've petitioned the State Historical Society to recognize what happened there. Next month, archaeologists will begin excavating the Deep Hollow site, looking for remains. Melissa's ankle healed, but our relationship didn't survive the experience. Some terrors are too great to share, even with someone you love. We speak occasionally, but the shadow of Emma and Deep Hollow stands between us. Sometimes at night, I wake to whispering and the soft sound of tapping at my window. Tap, tap, tap. A reminder, perhaps, that promises made in blood must be kept. Or maybe it's just the wind. My name is Robert Johnson, and I am 34 years old. This happened in Savage Gulf State Natural Area, Tennessee, 3 years ago. I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about it. I'd always been what you might call a loner. After my divorce finalized, another failed relationship to add to my growing list, I decided I needed some time away from everything. I'd been working for the same accounting firm in Nashville for 7 years, and the monotony was crushing me. When I requested 2 weeks off for a solo hiking trip, my boss seemed almost relieved to see me go. He probably thought the break would make me more productive when I returned. Little did I know I wouldn't be returning at all. I chose Savage Gulf because of its reputation for unspoiled wilderness. Located within South Cumberland State Park, it offered some of the most isolated terrain in Tennessee. Miles of unmarked trails winding through dense forest and plunging into deep gorges. I had read about its reputation for being disorienting, about how even experienced hikers occasionally got turned around. That appealed to me. I wanted to get lost, metaphorically at least. The weather forecast was ideal for early October. Crisp mornings, warm afternoons, and cool evenings perfect for camping. I packed meticulously my ultralight tent, sleeping bag rated for 20 degrees below what I'd face, water purifier, enough freeze-dried food for 10 days, first aid kit, my grandfather's hunting knife, headlamp, extra batteries, and my journal. My phone was fully charged, though I knew reception would be spotty at best. As I parked at the Stone Door Ranger Station on that Monday morning, I felt genuinely excited for the first time in months. The rangers made me fill out a backcountry permit, noting my planned route and expected return date. The older ranger, Bill, studied my itinerary with a frown. "Planning to go pretty deep in, aren't you?" he asked, tapping the map where I'd traced my route through the gorge and up toward Greeter Falls. "That's the idea," I said. He nodded slowly. "Just be careful around Moonshiner's Arch. Trail gets real faint there, and steer clear of the old Palmer property." Palmer property? I hadn't seen that marked on any map. Bill shrugged. "Just some abandoned homestead. Nothing worth seeing. Rotting buildings, maybe some old moonshine stills from Prohibition days. Locals don't go there." "Any particular reason?" I asked. He just shook his head and handed me back my permit. "Some places are best left alone, is all. You stick to the marked trails and you'll be fine." I should have listened to him. God, why didn't I listen? The first 2 days of hiking were everything I had hoped for. The famous Stone Door, a massive crack in the cliff face resembling an open door, was impressive, and the Big Creek Gulf Trail took me deep into the gorge where I camped beside a clear, rushing stream the first night. I slept well, genuinely at peace for the first time in months. On the second day, I hiked further into the wilderness, marveling at the towering hemlocks and ancient oaks. The fall colors were just beginning to show, splashes of red and gold against the deep green of the forest. I spotted deer, wild turkeys, and once, what I thought might be a black bear in the distance. The trail grew progressively rougher, less maintained. By late afternoon, I reached the base of Greeter Falls and set up camp, falling asleep to the soothing sound of cascading water. It was on the third day that things began to change. I woke to a strange silence. The birds that had been so vocal the previous mornings were quiet. Even the waterfall seemed muted somehow. A heavy mist hung in the air, reducing visibility to maybe 30 feet in any direction. I checked my watch, 7:15 a.m. Plenty of daylight ahead. I made coffee on my small camp stove and studied my map. According to my planned route, I would head southwest from Greeter Falls, follow an unnamed creek for a few miles, then connect with another trail that would eventually loop me back around toward the ranger station. The section I was about to enter was marked with dotted lines on the map, unofficial trails, seldom traveled. Perfect. I packed up camp and set out. The mist clung stubbornly to the trees, transforming the forest into something otherworldly. Shapes appeared and disappeared around me, mostly rocks and tree trunks distorted by the poor visibility. The silence was oppressive. No bird song, no insect buzzing. Nothing but the soft crunch of leaves beneath my boots and my own breathing. Around midday, I realized I hadn't seen a trail marker for hours. The path had gradually faded until it was barely distinguishable from the surrounding forest floor. I stopped to check my GPS, but the screen showed only a frustrating "signal lost" message. I pulled out my compass instead. If I continued southwest, I should eventually hit another trail or at least a recognizable landmark. That was when I first heard the whispers. They were so faint I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. A gentle susurration like multiple voices speaking just below the threshold of comprehension. I turned slowly, trying to pinpoint the source, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding flat in the misty air. "Is someone there?" The whispers ceased instantly. Nothing but silence answered me. I stood perfectly still for several minutes, straining to hear. Nothing. With an uneasy laugh, I blamed it on the wind in the trees or water running over distant rocks. But there was no wind that day, and I was far from any stream large enough to make such sounds. I pushed on, moving faster now, wanting to find a suitable camping spot before darkness fell. The forest grew denser, the trees crowding closer together. Massive rock formations began to appear, jutting from the earth like the bones of some ancient beast. And then, as I skirted around a particularly large boulder, I saw it, a structure through the trees. At first, I thought I'd stumbled across another hiker's camp, but as I drew closer, I realized what I was seeing. A small, dilapidated cabin. Its rough-hewn logs were blackened with age, the single window a dark, empty socket. The door hung askew on rusted hinges. The Palmer property. It had to be. I checked my map again, trying to figure out how I had strayed so far off course. According to my calculations, I should be nowhere near any human structures. Yet, here it was. Logic told me to turn around immediately, to try to find my original path before dark. But curiosity, that fatal human flaw, pulled me forward. As I approached the cabin, the whispers returned. Louder now. More insistent, but still indecipherable. My heart pounded in my chest as I stopped at what might once have been a front yard, now just a small clearing choked with weeds and brambles. A sudden cold swept over me, far colder than the October day warranted. "Hello," I called again, my voice cracking slightly. "Anyone here?" The whispers cut off abruptly, leaving a silence so complete it hurt my ears. I should have left. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to put as much distance between myself and this place as possible. Instead, I took another step forward. The cabin door creaked open. I froze, my body tensing for flight. But nothing emerged from the dark interior. After a full minute of paralyzed waiting, I convinced myself it had been the wind, though there was still no breeze I could feel. "This is private property," I called out, trying to sound authoritative despite my fear. "I'm just a hiker who got lost. I don't mean any intrusion." Nothing. No response, no movement. Cursing my own stupidity, I took another step toward the cabin, then another. 5 more steps would bring me to the sagging porch. 4, 3. A face appeared in the doorway. I jerked backward with a startled cry. It was a woman, elderly, with skin so deeply wrinkled it resembled tree bark. Her white hair hung in tangled strands around her gaunt face. But it was her eyes that froze the blood in my veins. Milky white, pupilless, clearly blind. Yet she turned her head to follow my movements with unnerving accuracy. "You shouldn't be here." "Robert Johnson," she said, her voice like dry leaves rustling. Ice flooded my veins. I had never told anyone in the area my name. "How do you—" I began. "The forest told me," she interrupted. "It whispers the names of those who enter unwelcome." I took another step back. "I'm sorry, I got lost. I'll leave now." Her terrible blind eyes seemed to stare straight through me. "Too late for that. You've been called, and now you must answer." "Called? By whom?" Her thin lips stretched into what might have been a smile, revealing blackened gums and a few rotting teeth. "By the hollow heart, by the hunger in the hills, by the old ones who were here before your kind and will remain long after." I had backed up several more paces without realizing it. My pack felt suddenly heavy, dragging at my shoulders. "I don't understand," I said. "Please, just tell me how to get back to the main trail." She cackled, an awful, broken sound. "There is no going back now, city man. Only forward, through the hollow, through the dark." "What hollow? What are you talking about?" She lifted one gnarled finger and pointed behind me. "Moonshiner's Arch. Follow the whispers. They've chosen you." Despite my terror, I turned to look where she pointed. Through a gap in the trees, perhaps a quarter-mile distant, I could make out a natural stone arch spanning a dark crevice in the earth. When I turned back to the cabin, the old woman was gone. The door stood wide open now, revealing nothing but impenetrable darkness within. I ran. With no clear direction in mind, I simply fled away from the cabin, crashing through underbrush, stumbling over roots and rocks. Branches clawed at my face and arms. My pack caught on something, nearly yanking me off my feet, but I recovered and kept moving. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I collapsed against a massive oak tree, lungs burning, legs trembling with exertion. As my breathing slowed, I realized with dawning horror that I was now completely disoriented. The mist had thickened into a proper fog, reducing visibility to mere feet in every direction. I had no idea which way led back to the trails and which way might take me deeper into whatever nightmare I had stumbled into. My watch read 3:47 p.m. I had a few hours of daylight left, assuming the fog didn't make that irrelevant. I dug out my compass with shaking hands, determined to pick a direction and stick to it until I found something familiar. The compass needle spun wildly, never settling. I tapped the glass, shook it, but the needle continued its frantic rotation. The whispers started again. Closer now, all around me. "Leave me alone," I shouted into the fog. "What do you want from me?" As if in answer, the fog parted slightly, revealing a narrow game trail leading downhill. And at the edge of my vision, Moonshiner's Arch. The same arch the old woman had pointed out, though I had run in the opposite direction. Impossible, unless I had somehow circled back, or perhaps there was more than one such formation in these woods. I tried to rationalize what I was seeing, but deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. The whispers grew louder, and now, God help me, I could almost understand them, almost make out words in their sibilant murmuring. They seemed to be urging me toward the arch, toward whatever lay beyond it. I thought about making camp right there, waiting for morning and better visibility, but the idea of spending the night so close to whatever this was filled me with dread. No, better to keep moving, to find my way out before darkness fell completely. I started walking again, deliberately choosing a path that would take me away from the arch. Within 50 yards, the trail curved, and there it was again, directly ahead of me. My heart pounded painfully against my ribs. This couldn't be happening. I turned and ran again, picking a new direction. 5 minutes of running brought me, gasping and sweating, to the foot of the arch once more. The message was clear. There would be no avoiding this place. As I stood there, paralyzed by indecision, the whispers coalesced into a single voice, still quiet, but now frighteningly clear. "Through the hollow, Robert Johnson, through the dark." The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It resonated in my bones more than my ears. The rational part of my mind, the part that dealt with spreadsheets and tax codes, that believed in a world governed by logic and natural law, was screaming that none of this was real, that I had fallen and hit my head or eaten something toxic, or was suffering from some kind of stress-induced hallucination. But the primal part of me, the part connected to our ancestors who huddled in caves and feared the night with good reason, knew better. This was real, and it was ancient. The light was fading rapidly now, much faster than it should have. The fog took on a reddish tinge, as if absorbing the last bloody rays of sunset. Soon it would be dark, and whatever presence haunted this forest would no longer be constrained by even the pretense of natural law. I had no choice. With leaden feet, I approached the arch. It was larger up close, perhaps 15 feet high and nearly as wide. The opening beneath it was a perfect half-circle of absolute darkness. No fog penetrated that threshold. No light reflected from its depths. The whispers had ceased, replaced by an expectant silence. I switched on my headlamp, directing its beam into the darkness beyond the arch. The light simply vanished, swallowed by the blackness. It illuminated nothing. "What is this place?" I whispered, not expecting an answer. "The hollow between worlds," came the reply, so close it might have been spoken directly into my mind. "Where the veil wears thin, where bargains are made." What kind of bargains? Step through and learn. Every cell in my body revolted at the idea of entering that unnatural darkness. But the fog was closing in behind me, hurting me forward. The last light was fading from the sky. I was out of options. Taking a deep breath, I stepped through the arch. The world fell away. I was falling through absolute darkness, weightless, disembodied. No up or down, no sense of time or space. Just endless, consuming void. And then impact. I landed hard on a solid surface, the breath knocked from my lungs. For long moments I lay there, struggling to inhale, to orient myself in what seemed like continuing darkness. Gradually, I became aware of a faint illumination. Not daylight, not artificial light, but a subtle phosphorescence emanating from the walls around me. I was in a cave of some sort, a massive cavern with a ceiling so high it faded into shadow. I staggered to my feet, relieved to find my pack still on my back. My headlamp still functioned here, its beam cutting through the gloom to reveal more details of my surroundings. The cavern floor was smooth, almost polished, as if worn down by countless feet over countless years. The walls curved upward, covered in strange symbols carved into the living rock, spirals, dots, lines forming patterns that hurt my eyes to look at directly. And at the center of the cavern stood a stone. Not a natural formation, but a clearly worked monolith, perhaps 9 feet tall and 4 feet wide. It was carved from some black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. More symbols covered its surface, similar to those on the walls, but more complex, more deliberate. As my light played over it, I noticed dark stains running down its face. Ancient stains, soaked deep into the porous stone. I didn't need to be told what they were. "Hello?" My voice echoed strangely, coming back to me distorted, as if repeated by multiple throats. "Welcome, Robert Johnson," came that same voice from before, now seeming to emanate from the monolith itself. "Few find their way here willingly." "I didn't come willingly," I said, surprised at the steadiness of my own voice. "I was herded here, trapped." A sound like laughter rippled through the cavern. "Yet here you stand, alone, far from your empty life. Is that not what you wanted? To escape?" "Not like this," I whispered. "No. Then what did you seek in these ancient woods? Communion with nature. You city dwellers always think you can take what you want from the wild places and give nothing in return. But the old ways demand balance, sacrifice." A chill ran down my spine. "What kind of sacrifice?" The laughter came again, colder this time. "That depends on what you wish to receive." Before I could respond, the air around the monolith shimmered. A figure began to take shape, translucent at first, then gradually solidifying until a man stood before me. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in clothing from another century, a dusty black suit with a high collar, a vest, and heavy boots. His face was deeply lined, with sunken cheeks and eyes that burned with an unnatural light. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, his voice normal now, human with a thick Appalachian accent. I shook my head. "Name's Elijah Palmer," he said with a slight bow. "This was my land, still is, in a manner of speaking. The Palmer property," I breathed, "the homestead." He smiled thinly. "My family settled here in 1819, worked this land for generations, until the drought of 1837, 3 years without proper rain. Crops failed, livestock died, children started getting sick." As he spoke, more figures appeared behind him. Women in long dresses, men in work clothes, children with hollow eyes and swollen bellies. Their forms wavered, like heat shimmer on a summer road. We prayed to the Christian God, Palmer continued, pacing around the monolith. Prayed until our knees bled, but no help came, so we turned to older ways. Ways the native folk knew before us, ways my grandmother remembered from the old country. "What did you do?" I asked, though I feared I already knew. Palmer's ghostly hand caressed the stained face of the monolith. "We made a bargain with what dwells beneath. Blood for rain, life for life." The spectral children behind him stared at me with accusing eyes. "First, the animals," Palmer said. "Then one child, my youngest, just 5 years old." His voice caught, a flash of genuine grief crossing his features before the cold smile returned. The rains came the very next day, and our remaining crops flourished beyond all natural explanation. I swallowed hard. And then? And then we learned the truth of such bargains. They're never truly finished. The hunger below is endless. When the next drought came, it demanded more. 2 children this time. Then, the next year, 3. The ghostly children's expressions changed, from accusation to a horrible kind of hunger that mirrored Palmer's own. "Eventually, the hunger took us all," Palmer said, spreading his arms to encompass the spectral figures around him. "Every Palmer, every child, every wife and husband. But even death didn't release us from the bargain." The children began to move forward, their forms becoming more solid with each step. "Now we serve the hollow heart," Palmer said, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper. "We are its voice, its hands in the world above. We bring it what it needs. What we all need." "And what is that?" I asked, backing away slowly. "Fresh blood," Palmer replied simply. "Fresh life to sustain us through the long years." The children were moving faster now, their eyes gleaming with an unholy light, their small hands reaching toward me with grasping, hungry motions. "The woman at the cabin," I began. "Esther," Palmer nodded. "My wife's sister. She refused to participate in our arrangement. The hollow heart punished her with endless life instead of the release of death. A century and a half of solitude, blindness, madness. A warning to those who might consider breaking their oaths." The children had formed a circle around me now, their spectral bodies solidifying further. I could see details I hadn't noticed before, missing fingers, bruised necks, hollow cavities where hearts should be. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, spinning to keep them all in view. Palmer approached the monolith and placed both hands upon it. The stone began to glow with a sickly greenish light, pulsing like a heart. "A choice," he said. "The same choice every wanderer who finds this place is given. Join us willingly, bind yourself to the hollow heart, and gain power beyond mortal understanding. Or resist and be taken anyway, but remain conscious through every moment of your consumption, aware as your essence feeds the hunger below for all eternity." The children moved closer still, their cold hands now inches from my skin. Their mouths had opened impossibly wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth that no human child should possess. "That's no choice at all," I said. Palmer shrugged. "It satisfies the old laws. Free will must be honored, after a fashion." The monolith's pulsing grew more rapid, more intense. The symbols carved into its surface began to glow as well, writhing and shifting before my eyes like living things. "Why me?" I asked, playing for time as I desperately tried to think of a way out. "The hollow heart chooses," Palmer said simply. "I've learned not to question its appetites. Now decide, Robert Johnson. Your time grows short." The ghostly children pressed closer, their cold hands finally making contact with my clothes, my exposed skin. Each touch burned like frost, numbing the flesh beneath. I had seconds at most before they overwhelmed me completely. In that moment of utter desperation, a memory surfaced, something I had read years ago about the folklore of the Appalachians, about how iron was anathema to spirits and dark forces, how it bound them, repelled them, weakened their influence in the mortal world. My grandfather's hunting knife, the one item I carried that had been passed down through generations of my family, old steel, forged in another time. With my last free hand, I yanked it from its sheath at my belt. The reaction was immediate. The children nearest the blade hissed and recoiled, their forms becoming momentarily translucent. Palmer's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in anger. "Old iron," he spat. "It won't save you down here, city man. This is the Hollow Heart's domain." He was right. Already the children were regaining their courage, circling more warily but still advancing. The knife created a small bubble of safety around me, but I couldn't hold them all off forever. My gaze fell on the monolith, still pulsing with that sickly green light, the source of Palmer's power, the physical anchor of whatever dark entity lurked beneath this cavern. Without fully forming a plan, I lunged toward it, knife extended. Palmer screamed, a sound of pure rage and terror. The children surged forward, trying to intercept me, but they feared the blade more than they desired my blood. They parted just enough for me to reach the monolith. Up close, I could feel the wrongness of it, a vibration that set my teeth on edge, a cold that penetrated to my marrow. The symbols carved into its surface seemed to writhe and twist as I watched, forming patterns that my mind refused to comprehend. I had no idea what I was doing, acting purely on instinct now. I pressed the flat of the blade against the stone. The effect was catastrophic. The monolith's green glow flared blindingly bright, then began to crack and splinter from the point of contact. Fissures spread across its surface like lightning bolts, each one leaking that same sickly light. Palmer howled, a sound of such anguish and fury that I thought my eardrums would burst. The spectral children screamed in unison, their forms beginning to unravel at the edges. "What have you done?" Palmer's voice was no longer human, but a chorus of agonized voices layered atop one another. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My entire body was rigid with pain as energy coursed through the knife and into me. Every nerve ending felt like it was being simultaneously burned and frozen. The cavern began to shake violently. Stalactites crashed down from the distant ceiling. Cracks appeared in the floor, widening into chasms that revealed deeper darkness below. Through the haze of agony, I saw Palmer's form begin to disintegrate, like ash in a strong wind. The children were already gone. The monolith continued to crack and splinter, pieces of it falling away to reveal a pulsing mass within, something organic, something alive. With the last of my strength, I plunged the knife directly into that throbbing core. The world exploded around me. I remember fragments of what followed. Unbearable light, a scream that came from beneath the earth itself, the sensation of being torn apart and reassembled 1,000 times in a single instant, and then silence, darkness, peace. I woke at dawn, lying on the forest floor beneath Moonshiner's Arch. My clothes were torn and filthy, my body covered in scratches and bruises. My pack lay nearby, its contents scattered as if it had been ripped open in a frenzy. Of my grandfather's knife there was no sign. I staggered to my feet, disoriented and weak. The arch above me was just an arch now, an unusual, natural formation but nothing more. No darkness lurked beneath it. No whispers haunted the air. The fog had lifted completely, revealing a clear autumn morning. Birds sang in the trees. Sunlight dappled the forest floor. Everything was normal. Had it all been a hallucination? Some kind of stress-induced breakdown coupled with exposure and dehydration? The rational part of my mind clung desperately to this explanation. But as I gathered my scattered belongings, I noticed something that froze the blood in my veins. A small wooden figure, crudely carved, had been placed atop my sleeping bag. A child with hollow eyes and an impossibly wide mouth, and carved into its chest a single word: soon. I abandoned most of my gear and ran. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. Somehow, whether by miracle or the lingering influence of whatever I had encountered, I found my way back to a marked trail by midday. By evening, I had reached the ranger station. The rangers found my story concerning enough to launch a search of the area I described, but they found nothing. No cabin, no evidence of any Palmer property ever having existed in that section of the park. Historical records showed no family by that name ever settling in Savage Gulf. The doctors diagnosed me with extreme exhaustion, dehydration, and the early stages of hypothermia, all conditions that could explain vivid hallucinations. They recommended psychiatric follow-up for what they termed an acute stress reaction. I never went back to my accounting job, never returned to my apartment in Nashville. Within a week of being released from the hospital, I had sold most of my possessions and moved to Arizona, as far from the forests of Tennessee as I could reasonably get. But it doesn't matter. Distance offers no protection, because every night in my dreams, my name is David Jones, and I am 34 years old. This happened in Savage Gulf State Natural Area in Tennessee just last summer. I never thought I'd be sharing this story, partly because I didn't think anyone would believe me, and partly because even now, months later, I can barely bring myself to think about what happened in those woods. I'd been feeling suffocated by my life in Nashville. The endless meetings, the constant noise, the perpetual connectivity, it was all becoming too much. After my divorce finalized, I decided I needed to disconnect completely, to find some peace and solitude. That's why I planned a week-long solo hiking trip through Savage Gulf. The park is known for its rugged terrain, spectacular waterfalls, and vast stretches of wilderness where you can go days without seeing another person. It sounded perfect. I'd done my research. I had topographical maps, plenty of supplies, a high-end tent, and all the gear I needed. I even splurged on a satellite phone, though I promised myself I'd only use it in an absolute emergency. This trip was about disconnecting after all. The first 2 days were everything I'd hoped for. The Stone Door Trail offered breathtaking views of the Gulf below, and camping near Ranger Falls gave me the peaceful sound of rushing water to lull me to sleep. I felt the knots in my shoulders loosening for the first time in years. On the third day, I ventured deeper into the wilderness, following the Big Creek Gulf Trail. The path grew less defined as I moved away from the more popular areas. The forest seemed to close in around me, ancient hemlocks and oaks forming a dense canopy that filtered the sunlight into ghostly beams. The air grew noticeably cooler and damper as I descended into the Gulf. It was mid-afternoon when I first sensed something was off. I couldn't quite place it at first, just a feeling, a prickling at the back of my neck. Then I realized what it was. Silence. Complete and utter silence. No birds chirping, no insects buzzing, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just nothing. I paused, listening intently. The only sound was my own breathing and the soft crunch of leaves beneath my boots. I'd been in enough forest to know this wasn't natural. In a healthy woodland ecosystem, there's always noise, a constant symphony of life. This silence felt wrong, oppressive. Just a weather change, I muttered to myself, adjusting my backpack. Animals sense storms before we do. I checked the sky through breaks in the canopy, but it was clear blue. Still, I convinced myself it was nothing to worry about and pressed on. I had another 3 miles to go before reaching my planned campsite at Connector Trail Junction. As I hiked, the silence persisted. Worse, I began to feel as if I was being watched. Every few minutes I'd turn quickly, certain I'd catch someone, or something, following me. But there was never anything there. Just trees and rocks and the winding trail. By late afternoon, I reached an area locals call the Gulch, a particularly steep-sided portion of the Gulf where massive boulders, some the size of cars, had fallen from the bluffs above. The trail wound between these giants, creating a natural labyrinth. The light was fading faster than it should have been, shadows stretching unnaturally long across the forest floor. I picked up my pace, not wanting to navigate this terrain in the dark. As I rounded a particularly large boulder, I froze. There, not 20 feet ahead of me on the trail, stood an old woman. She was small and hunched, dressed in what looked like homespun clothes that might have been fashionable a century ago. Her hair was a wild tangle of white, and her skin was deeply lined, like weathered leather. But it was her eyes that stopped me cold, pale, almost colorless, and fixed on me with an intensity that made my heart stutter. Hello," I called, raising a hand in greeting. "Didn't expect to meet anyone else out here." She didn't respond, didn't even blink, just kept staring. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the cooling air. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" I took a cautious step forward. Finally, she spoke, her voice like dry leaves scraping across stone. "You shouldn't be here, David Jones." My blood turned to ice. I hadn't told anyone my name, hadn't seen another soul for days. "How do you know my name?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Her thin lips curved into what might have been a smile, revealing teeth that seemed too numerous and sharp for a human mouth. "The trees told me. They tell me everything about those who trespass." I swallowed hard. "I'm not trespassing. This is a public trail." She tilted her head, the movement oddly bird-like and jerky. "This land was never meant for your kind. It tolerates your passing, nothing more. But you plan to stay, to sleep in its embrace." She took a step toward me, and I had to fight the urge to back away. "It won't allow that. Not here, not in its heart." "Look, I don't want any trouble," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm just passing through, camping for the night, and I'll be gone tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" she echoed, as if the word amused her. "For some, tomorrow never comes in these woods." She reached into a pouch at her waist and withdrew something small that I couldn't quite see. "Take this. If you insist on staying, this might protect you." "Might." She extended her hand, and reluctantly, I reached out. She dropped something into my palm, a small, rough stone with a hole worn through its center, threaded on a leather cord. "Wear it," she said. "Don't take it off, not even to bathe. And whatever you hear tonight, whatever calls your name, don't answer. Don't even whisper a response." Before I could ask any more questions, she stepped off the trail and behind one of the massive boulders. I hurried after her, questions burning on my tongue, but when I rounded the boulder, she was gone. No sign of her, not even footprints in the soft earth. I stood there, heart pounding, the stone heavy in my palm. Part of me wanted to dismiss the entire encounter. Maybe she was just a local eccentric who liked to spook hikers, or maybe I was more exhausted than I realized and had imagined the whole thing. But the stone was real enough, warm against my skin despite the cooling air. I examined it closely. It was ordinary looking, just a river stone worn smooth by water with a natural hole through its center, the kind of thing you might find on any stream bed. After a moment's hesitation, I slipped the cord over my head, tucking the stone beneath my shirt. I couldn't shake the encounter as I continued toward my planned campsite. The old woman's words kept replaying in my mind. "Whatever calls your name, don't answer." It was exactly the kind of cryptic warning you'd ignore in a horror movie and later regret. By the time I reached the junction where I planned to camp, dusk had deepened considerably. I set up my tent with practiced efficiency, gathered wood for a small fire, and prepared a simple dinner of dehydrated stew. All the while, the silence of the forest pressed in on me. No crickets began their evening chorus, no owls called to mark the transition to night, just that unnatural, smothering quiet. After eating, I sat by the fire, watching the flames dance. Despite the warmth, I couldn't stop shivering. The stone around my neck seemed to pulse occasionally, like a second heartbeat against my chest. Full dark had fallen when I first heard it, a voice calling from somewhere in the trees. "David?" It was faint, as if from a great distance, but unmistakably my name. I stiffened, remembering the old woman's warning. "David, help me, please." The voice was clearer now, a woman's voice, desperate and afraid. It sounded eerily like my ex-wife Sarah, but that was impossible. Sarah was in Chicago, hundreds of miles away, and had made it abundantly clear she wanted nothing more to do with me. "David, I'm hurt. I can't move." Every instinct screamed at me to respond, to go help whoever was calling. But the old woman's warning held me back. "Whatever calls your name, don't answer." I added more wood to the fire, building it higher, trying to focus on the flames rather than the voice. "David, please, it's getting closer." The voice had changed subtly, still recognizable as Sarah's, but with something else underneath, something that raised the hairs on my arms. I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to call out. Instead, I crawled into my tent, zipped it shut, and buried myself in my sleeping bag, hands pressed over my ears. The calling continued for hours, sometimes sounding like Sarah, sometimes like my mother, who had died when I was a teenager, and sometimes like a child, frightened and alone. Each voice knew exactly what to say to pierce my heart, to make me want to rush out into the darkness. At some point, exhaustion won out over fear, and I fell into a fitful sleep. I woke to silence again, gray pre-dawn light filtering through the tent fabric. For a moment, I lay still, listening. Nothing. No birds greeting the day, no squirrels chattering. Just that same oppressive quiet. Perhaps it had all been a nightmare. The old woman, the voices in the night. But when I pressed my hand to my chest, I felt the stone, warm against my skin. I emerged from my tent to find the forest shrouded in a thin mist that clung to the ground and wound between the trees like pale serpents. My fire had died during the night, not even embers remaining. As I knelt to restart it, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Surrounding my campsite, just at the edge of the clearing, were footprints. Dozens of them, all sizes. Men's boots, women's shoes, small barefoot prints that could only belong to children. They circled my entire camp as if a crowd had stood watching me all night, kept at bay only by… What? The fire? The stone around my neck? My hands shook as I packed up my gear. I needed to get out of this gulf, back to the plateau above, back to civilization and people and noise. I abandoned my planned route and consulted my map for the quickest way out. The Collins Gulf Trail would take me up out of the Gulf to the north, eventually connecting with the ranger station at the Collins West Access Point. It would be a hard day's hike, nearly 12 miles of rough terrain, but if I pushed, I could make it before dark. I set off at a fast pace, the morning mist still clinging to the forest floor. The silence continued, but now it was punctuated by occasional sounds that were almost worse. A branch snapping far behind me, a whispered word I couldn't quite make out, the scrape of what might have been nails on bark. By mid-morning, the mist had burned off, but a new problem emerged. The trail, which had been clearly visible and well-maintained near my campsite, began to fade, becoming overgrown and difficult to follow. Several times I had to backtrack after losing it completely. The forest here was older, the trees massive and gnarled, their branches weaving together overhead to create a canopy so dense that it felt like twilight even at midday. Moss covered everything, trees, rocks, the ground itself, as if nature was slowly reclaiming this place, erasing any human intrusion. It was as I paused to consult my map for what felt like the 100th time that I heard a twig snap nearby. I spun around, half expecting to see the old woman again. Instead, there was a man standing at the edge of a small clearing I'd just passed through. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in clothes that seemed oddly formal for hiking. Dark pants, a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and a vest. His face was partially shadowed by the brim of an old-fashioned hat, but I could see enough to tell he was older, perhaps in his 60s, with a neatly trimmed beard. Unlike the old woman, there was nothing immediately threatening about his appearance. In fact, he had the distinguished look of a professor or doctor. Still, after my experience the previous day, I was wary. "Hello there," he called, his voice cultured and pleasant. "Seem to be a bit turned around, don't you?" I nodded cautiously. "Trail's not as clear as it should be." He smiled, stepping forward into a shaft of sunlight that had managed to penetrate the canopy. "Yes, this section doesn't see much maintenance these days. Not since the incident." "Incident?" I asked before I could stop myself. His smile widened slightly. "Oh, just a hiker who went missing a few years back. Never found him. Or rather, never found all of him." He gestured toward the trail ahead. "I'm heading up to the plateau myself. Would you care for some company? Safety and numbers and all that." Everything about this encounter felt wrong. How had this man in his formal clothes appeared so silently behind me? Why wasn't he carrying any gear? No backpack, no water bottle, nothing a hiker would need. And yet, the thought of having company, of not facing whatever was happening alone, was tempting. My hand moved unconsciously to the stone beneath my shirt. It felt hot now, almost uncomfortably so. "That's kind of you," I said carefully, "but I think I'll be fine on my own. I've got a GPS and plenty of supplies." His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Something cold and hungry. "Are you certain? These woods can be unpredictable. Paths that seem clear can lead nowhere, or somewhere you don't wish to go." "I'm sure," I said firmly, backing away slightly. "Thanks, anyway." He inclined his head in acknowledgement. "As you wish. But should you change your mind—" He reached into his vest pocket and produced a small, white business card. "Do call. Reception is surprisingly good in certain parts of these woods." Before I could say I had no intention of calling anyone, he had placed the card on a fallen log between us and stepped back, gesturing for me to take it. Against my better judgment, I moved forward and picked up the card. It was heavy stock, expensive feeling, with just a name and phone number embossed in elegant script, Dr. Elias Blackwood, and a local area code. When I looked up to thank him, purely out of ingrained politeness, he was gone, just like the old woman, vanished without a sound. I shoved the card into my pocket and hurried on, trying to ignore the crawling sensation between my shoulder blades, as if Dr. Blackwood's eyes were still on me. The trail continued to deteriorate as the day wore on. By early afternoon, I was fighting my way through undergrowth, following what was little more than a game trail. According to my map, I should have reached the junction with the Stagecoach Historic Trail hours ago, which would have led me directly to the plateau. Instead, I was still deep in the gulf, with the steep walls rising on either side of me. My GPS was no help. It kept losing signal, and when it did work, it showed me in places that made no sense, sometimes miles from where I should have been, sometimes in locations that didn't even exist on my map. As afternoon faded toward evening, I was forced to admit I was lost. The sensible thing would be to retrace my steps to the last place I was certain of my location, but the trail behind me had become indistinct, swallowed by the encroaching forest. I found a small clearing beside what appeared to be a dried-up stream bed and decided to make camp. Better to rest and try again in daylight than to wander blindly in the dark. Setting up camp this time was a rushed, anxious affair. My hands trembled as I erected my tent and I kept glancing over my shoulder, certain I was being watched. I gathered as much firewood as I could find, building a larger fire than was strictly necessary. The warmth and light provided little comfort. As I sat beside the flames, forcing myself to eat an energy bar despite my knotted stomach, I thought about using my satellite phone. Surely this qualified as an emergency. But when I pulled it from my pack, the screen remained dark. The battery, which I'd fully charged before my trip, was completely drained. Night fell swiftly, the darkness beyond my fire absolute. And with the darkness came the voices again, more of them this time, and closer. "David, come walk with us, David. Why won't you help me, David? I'm so cold. Daddy, "Daddy, is that you?" This one, the voice of a young child, was perhaps the most disturbing, as I had no children. I huddled closer to the fire, the stone burning against my chest like a coal. Hours passed in this torment, the voices growing more insistent, more numerous, sometimes seeming to be just inches from my ear. Then, at what must have been around midnight, a new sound cut through the chorus of voices, the crack of a branch breaking under weight. Not in the distance, but close at the edge of my clearing. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing a burning branch from the fire to use as both light and weapon. I spun in a slow circle, trying to penetrate the wall of darkness. "Who's there?" I called, my voice cracking. "Show yourself." The voices fell silent all at once, leaving only the pop and crackle of my fire. Then, from directly behind me, came a wet, rattling breath. I whirled around and found myself face to face with something that, at first glance, resembled a man. But only at first glance. It stood easily 7 feet tall, emaciated to the point where its skin was drawn tight over its bones, creating a skull-like visage. Its eyes were sunken pits of absolute blackness, its mouth too wide, filled with needle-like teeth. Long, spindly arms ended in hands with fingers that stretched into curved, yellowed talons. But worst of all was the antlered crown that rose from its head. Not the elegant antlers of a deer, but twisted, malformed growths that seemed to pulse with their own hideous life. A wendigo. The word floated up from some half-remembered legend, a spirit of hunger and winter and madness. I stumbled backward, nearly falling into my fire. The creature made no move to follow, just stood at the edge of the firelight, watching me with those empty eyes. Slowly, deliberately, it raised one taloned hand and beckoned. The stone around my neck burned so hot I thought it might sear my skin, yet I couldn't take my eyes off the monstrosity before me. "No," I whispered, not sure if I was addressing the creature or simply denying its existence. It tilted its head, an almost curious gesture, then opened its maw impossibly wide and emitted a sound that was part scream, part howl, a sound of such primal hunger that my knees went weak. I dropped the burning branch and clapped my hands over my ears, but the sound bored into my skull, seeming to resonate in my very bones. As suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. When I looked up, the creature was gone. But in its place stood Dr. Blackwood, smiling that same pleasant smile. "Changed your mind about wanting company?" he asked, as if we were meeting on a city street rather than in the depths of a haunted forest. "What are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely audible. His smile widened, revealing teeth that were just a touch too sharp. "A facilitator, Mr. Jones. I help travelers like yourself find their way." "To where?" "Why, to wherever they truly wish to go." He spread his hands in a magnanimous gesture. "Some seek escape from their lives, from responsibility, from pain. Others seek enlightenment, or power, or simply the thrill of the unknown. The Gulf provides in its fashion." "I just want to get out," I said. "Back to the trailhead, back to my car." Dr. Blackwood sighed, looking genuinely disappointed. "Are you certain? You came here seeking something, David Jones. Something you felt was missing from your life. The Gulf knows this. It could give you what you seek, if you're brave enough to accept its gifts." I shook my head. "I don't want anything from this place. I just want to leave." "Ah, well, not everyone is suited for the deeper mysteries." He reached into his vest and produced another business card, identical to the one he'd given me earlier. "Should you reconsider, the offer remains open. Simply burn this card in your fire and speak my name 3 times." He placed the card on a nearby rock and stepped back into the darkness. This time, I watched him go, saw the shadows seem to fold around him until he was simply gone. I didn't touch the card. Instead, I fed more wood to my fire and sat with my back against a tree, determined to stay awake until dawn. The stone continued to burn against my chest, and occasionally I thought I saw movement at the very edge of the firelight. tall, skeletal shapes moving with unnatural grace between the trees. Somehow, impossibly, I must have dozed off, because I woke with a start to find my fire burned down to embers and the first gray light of dawn filtering through the trees. I was still alive, still whole. The business card remained where Dr. Blackwood had left it. In the pale morning light, I could see that what I had taken for white cardstock was actually something else, something yellowed and fibrous that looked disturbingly like human skin. I left it untouched as I broke camp with trembling hands. I had no idea which way to go, but staying put was unthinkable. I chose a direction that I hoped would lead uphill toward the plateau and set off. The forest seemed different in the morning light, less oppressive, though still unnaturally quiet. I hiked for what felt like hours, pushing through underbrush, climbing over fallen trees, wading through shallow streams. The gulf walls remained distressingly distant, suggesting I was walking parallel to them rather than toward them. It was approaching midday when I stumbled upon a clearing unlike any I'd seen before, perfectly circular, about 30 feet across, with a carpet of lush green moss covering the ground. In the center stood a single, massive oak tree. Unlike the other trees in the forest, this one was in full leaf, its branches spreading to create a canopy that exactly matched the circumference of the clearing. There was something about the scene that struck me as deliberately arranged, like a stage set, waiting for actors. Every instinct told me to go around, to avoid stepping into that perfect circle. But as I skirted the edge, I saw something that made my heart stutter. A trail, a real trail with clear blazes marked on the trees, leading away from the far side of the clearing. To reach it, I would have to cross through the circle passing beneath that ancient oak. I hesitated, weighing my options. There were no options, really. I needed to find my way out of this place before nightfall. Another night like the last might be more than my sanity could bear. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the clearing. The moss was springy beneath my boots, and the air noticeably warmer, as if I'd walked into a greenhouse. I kept my eyes fixed on the trail visible on the far side, walking as quickly as I dared. I was halfway across when I heard it, a whisper, seeming to come from the oak itself. David Jones. It wasn't a question, but a statement, as if the tree was tasting my name, savoring it. I froze, then forced myself to keep moving, one foot in front of the other. She gave you my stone. The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It simply was, like the rustling of leaves or the creaking of branches in wind. That old witch, always interfering. Despite every instinct screaming at me to run, I found myself turning to face the oak. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. The massive trunk seemed to shift, bark rippling like water. Then, horrifyingly, a face emerged, not carved into the wood, but formed by it, the bark flowing like liquid to create features. Eyes opened, deep hollows of absolute blackness. A mouth formed, splitting the trunk in a grotesque parody of a smile. "I am the heart of the gulf," it said, its voice now surrounding me, coming from everywhere and nowhere. The oldest living thing in these woods. I was here when the first men came with their axes and fire. I was here when they fled, screaming into the night, and I will be here long after you are dust. I clutched the stone hanging from my neck. "What do you want from me?" The tree's laugh was the sound of branches breaking in a storm. "Want? I want nothing from you, David Jones. You are the one who came seeking escape, seeking meaning, seeking to fill the emptiness inside you." Its words struck uncomfortably close to home. "I just want to leave," I said, hating the pleading note in my voice. "Of course you do," the tree said, its wooden features shifting in what might have been amusement. "They always do, in the end. But the question is not what you want now, in your fear. The question is, what brought you here in the first place?" Before I could respond, a branch descended from above, moving with deliberate purpose rather than being blown by wind. From it dangled something that made my breath catch, my ex-wife's pendant, a small emerald on a gold chain that had belonged to her grandmother. Sarah had been wearing it the last time I saw her, the day our divorce was finalized. "How did you—" I began. "I have many servants in the world beyond my woods," the tree said. "They bring me tributes, stories, pieces of lives." The branch lowered the pendant until it was swinging gently before my eyes, catching the dappled sunlight. "You could have her back, you know," the tree said, its voice suddenly gentle, cajoling. "Not just the trinket, but the woman herself. She misses you, in her way, regrets her decision. All it would take is a simple exchange." I tore my eyes away from the hypnotic sway of the pendant. "What kind of exchange?" "The stone for her heart. Figuratively speaking, of course." The wooden face twisted into what might have been a smile. "Remove the stone, place it in my roots, and when you leave these woods, you will find her waiting, her love for you renewed, stronger than before." I thought of Sarah, of the life we'd planned together, of the emptiness I'd felt since she left. For a moment, the offer was temptingly sweet. Then I remembered the voices in the night, calling my name, the footprints surrounding my camp, Dr. Blackwood and his too-sharp smile. "No," I said, stepping back. "I don't believe you." The tree's face contorted in rage, bark splintering. "You doubt my power?" The voice was no longer gentle, but a roar that shook the clearing. "I, who have stood for centuries. I, who have feasted on the souls of men far braver than you?" The branches above began to writhe like serpents, reaching for me. I turned and ran, abandoning all dignity, all pretense of courage. I sprinted for the trail I'd seen, the stone bouncing against my chest with each desperate stride. Behind me, the tree's rage filled the clearing, branches lashing the air, roots erupting from the ground to grab at my ankles. I leapt the last few feet, crashing through the underbrush and onto the blessed normality of a human-made trail. I didn't stop running until my lungs were burning and my legs trembling with exhaustion. When I finally paused to catch my breath, leaning against a tree trunk, I looked back the way I'd come. There was no sign of the circular clearing, no monstrous oak visible through the trees. Just forest, ordinary and quiet. But not silent, I realized with a jolt of relief. I could hear birds calling, insects buzzing, the small sounds of a healthy woodland. Whatever malevolent influence had gripped this part of the forest, I had somehow passed beyond its reach. The trail I was on was clear and well-maintained, with fresh blue blazes marking the way. According to a small wooden sign at the next junction, I was on the North Rim Trail, less than 3 miles from the Collins Gulf West trailhead. I hiked those 3 miles at a near jog, never looking back, the stone still warm against my skin. When I finally emerged from the forest into the gravel parking lot where my car waited, untouched and ordinary, I nearly wept with relief. As I drove away from Savage Gulf, back toward civilization and sanity, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see Dr. Blackwood or the old woman or something worse following me. But there was nothing, just the empty road winding through the Tennessee hills. I still wear the stone. I've researched it since returning home. Apparently, hold stones like mine are called hag stones in folklore, believed to ward off evil spirits and allow the wearer to see through fairy glamour to the truth beneath. I don't know if I believe in such things. What I do know is that something in those woods wanted me, and this simple stone somehow kept me safe. Sometimes, especially at night, I think I hear whispers calling my name, and sometimes in my dreams, I see that circular clearing and the ancient oak with its wooden face. In those dreams, it's always smiling, patient and terrible, as if it knows that sooner or later, I'll return. Because the worst part, the part I can barely admit even to myself, is that despite the terror, despite nearly losing my mind or worse, there was something seductive about the Gulf, about the mysteries it offered. In those quiet moments between sleep and waking, I find myself wondering what would have happened if I'd taken the tree's offer, what secrets I might have learned, what power I might have gained. And I wonder if next time, because somehow I know there will be a next time, I'll be strong enough to say no again.